Margaery Tyrell stood on a balcony at the highest point of Highgarden, her slender hands wrapped around the cool, carved stone of the balustrade. Dawn's first light painted the rows of roses and neatly trimmed hedges in watery gold. She usually found solace in the symmetrical perfection of the gardens, the meticulously arranged flower beds that stretched into the distance in patterns only truly visible from this lofty vantage. Yet that morning, she felt no sense of peace. The letter in her chambers bore tidings that could change everything. She had read it once in the privacy of candlelight. Now she wondered if she dared read it again. Rumors always fluttered across Westeros like startled sparrows, but sometimes they carried the seeds of undeniable truth. It was widely whispered that Daenerys Targaryen, the last remaining child of King Aerys II, if one believed the common tales, had not only survived in the distant east but had also gathered an army large enough to rival the combined hosts of several Westerosi houses. She possessed dragons, the first the world had seen in centuries. Margaery had paid polite attention to such whispers in the past, nodding and smiling if they came up in conversation, letting them settle in her mind until they might be of use. She had never been one to dismiss any tale out of hand, no matter how far-fetched it might appear. Even so, it still seemed unreal that the silver-haired Targaryen queen, rumored to be as beautiful as she was fearsome, could truly threaten the Iron Throne. The Lannisters controlled King's Landing, for the moment. But Margaery, widowed more than once, had felt the tides shifting with each new funeral pyre. She stood in an especially precarious position now. The loss of her last royal husband and the subsequent humiliations that came from the entanglements in King's Landing had left House Tyrell's alliance with the crown fraying at the edges. The Lannisters might still have power, but all it took was a single misstep, one more rash decision by Cersei Lannister, and Margaery's entire family could be in peril. She lifted her gaze from the gardens to the rolling plains. Somewhere out there, across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen was forging her empire in fire and blood. If the talk was accurate, and Margaery had her own network of informants, Daenerys was amassing a fleet powerful enough to sail to Westeros and stake her claim on the Seven Kingdoms. House Tyrell now balanced on a thin line between the Lannisters and a would-be queen whose symbol was a three-headed dragon. Faced with danger from both sides, Margaery had begun to consider that their best chance for survival might lie with the exiled Targaryen. Decisions in wartime were seldom straightforward, but Margaery had learned the subtlety of politics from a young age, first under her grandmother's sly tutelage, then in the lion's den that was King's Landing. She was no warrior herself, but she commanded loyalty, respect, and a certain fondness from the people. Her grandmother, Olenna Redwine Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, had once told her, "The common folk love you, and so long as they love you, you can be dangerous." That was the key. She knew how to gain the trust of the small folk, how to sway the hearts of lords in the Reach by mirroring their desires for peace and prosperity. She knew how to keep her family's best interests close while never appearing the least bit manipulative. But Daenerys Targaryen, should Margaery and the Tyrells choose to support her, would require a show of devotion, an unmistakable sign that the Lords of the Reach stood behind the last Targaryen. Cersei, on the other hand, would see such a move as an act of open treason. For the Tyrells to pivot allegiance would not be an easy matter. Forces from the crown would descend upon the Reach in retaliation, unless Margaery and her family moved swiftly and with cunning. She thought of her father, Mace Tyrell, full of pomp but lacking the subtlety to maneuver such a momentous shift. She also thought of her grandmother, whose sharp mind could slice through any intricate political knot. Olenna's approval was crucial. The palace corridors of Highgarden were hushed that morning as Margaery left the balcony. She walked with measured steps, summoning a pleasant smile for any servant she passed. The hush in Highgarden had grown since the news of the recent conflicts in King's Landing reached them. Soldiers' footfalls echoed more loudly these days. Even the painted hall, which glowed with sunlight from stained-glass windows, felt claustrophobic under the weight of impending war. Margaery paused at a wide, arched window overlooking the courtyard and saw a unit of Tyrell men training. She noted with satisfaction that their discipline had improved. If war did come, and all signs said it would, they would need every ounce of skill. She made her way to Olenna's solar, Her grandmother had requested a private audience, presumably after receiving a similar letter. Margaery's heart fluttered as she lifted her hand to knock at the door. She knew their conversation would be the first step in charting a new course, one that could forever reshape the Tyrell legacy. "Come," Olenna's voice called from within, sharp but not unkind. Margaery stepped inside. The room was surprisingly dark. Thick drapes were drawn against the morning light, and a single candle flickered on a nearby table laden with correspondence. Olenna sat with perfect posture, regal despite her advanced years. She wore a headdress of pale green cloth, the color of the Tyrell rose, and her eyes gleamed with intention. "Close the door," Olenna said. Margaery obeyed and took a seat across from her. "You received the letter," Margaery said. "Of course," Olenna replied. Her voice carried a note of dryness. "It appears that the Dragon Queen, as they call her, has begun to reach out to certain lords of Westeros. Some local shieldlickers might have dismissed it, but her scribes have been thorough, sending copies and messages with the speed of hawks. The gist of it is plain enough. She seeks an alliance. She bids us to stand with her when she lands. She offers mercy in the form of guaranteed titles and lands, continued dominion over the Reach, if we place our swords at her back. She also promises retribution should we refuse." Margaery nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "Her words are both an offer and a threat." Olenna sniffed. "Of course, but that, in and of itself, is common enough in the game. The question is whether the Targaryen queen has the might she claims. Armies, yes, but what I find more interesting is her stable of dragons." Margaery shivered slightly at the mention of dragons. She had once seen an illustration in an old tome that belonged to a maester. A monstrous beast with leathery wings, spines along its back, and a maw spewing fire. The thought of such creatures soaring over the open fields of the Reach was terrifying. Yet that very terror could bring the Lannisters to heel. "If her dragons are as large as the rumors suggest," Margaery said carefully, "it means she can lay waste to her enemies with relatively little effort. If we do not bend the knee to her, Highgarden might go up in flames. Is that a risk you think we can afford?" Olenna pursed her lips. "I've no love for the notion of subjugation, but I am not an utter fool. If this Targaryen invader can destroy our fields and castle, we might lose everything, just to be stubborn. Still, allying with her is not without consequences. The Lannisters and their bannermen will take up arms against us. King's Landing might call us traitors, if it hasn't already. Cersei is Queen Regent, or so she believes," Margaery whispered, recalling how everything had gone sour in the capital. "Her wrath would be swift if she thought we were traitors." Olenna let out a curt laugh. "Her wrath? She is too reckless to see the consequences. We've lost too much at King's Landing already. Don't think I've forgotten what happened to our sweet Loras. The things that woman has allowed to happen in that vile city can never be forgiven. If Daenerys Targaryen offers me a chance at retribution, I might be inclined to take it." Margaery reached across the table and squeezed her grandmother's hand. "I share your sentiments, grandmother. Cersei has done us irreparable harm, but I want to ensure we step carefully. I've heard that Daenerys seeks not only the throne but the betterment of those under her rule. She freed slaves in Essos and toppled tyrants. Some call her the breaker of chains." "That might be so," Olenna said, cocking an eyebrow, "but don't let pretty stories cloud your judgment. She's also burned men alive. She's raised armies of Unsullied, a horde of Dothraki screamers. She has an appetite for domination, as any monarch does." Her voice softened a fraction. "Still, what other choice do we have?" Margaery's heart raced. Now they arrived at the crucial point of no return. "We must gauge which side offers us the best future. The Lannisters have lost the loyalty of many in the realm. We Tyrells still command respect, at least among the lords of the Reach. If we stand with Daenerys, if we help her take King's Landing, perhaps the new Queen of the Seven Kingdoms will see the value in our continuing friendship." Olenna set the letter down on the table, her face grim. "We cannot wait long. She will arrive sooner rather than later, and we must either prepare our resources or face ruin." The cunning move is to reach out to her discreetly. We must confirm her intentions and see if she truly wishes a peaceful annexation of the Reach, or if she merely wishes our subservience. In any case, child, I can see the fierce glint in your eyes. I know the part you wish to play. Margaery inclined her head. If I have learned anything in this Game of Thrones, it is that survival belongs to those who remain indispensable. I intend to show this Targaryen queen we are exactly that, indispensable. Through me, she can secure the support of the Reach. Our men, our harvests, our gold. These are tools that can help her win the realm. Let us see if she is wise enough to see that. Olenna's mouth curved into a faint smile. Then it's settled, for now. Gather what discreet riders you trust. We'll draft a reply carefully worded. Make it clear we offer an alliance, but do not commit ourselves so fully that we cannot turn about if circumstances change. In short, we'll keep the door ajar for Daenerys Targaryen and see if she's worthy of stepping through. In the weeks that followed, Margaery Tyrell experienced a strange mixture of mounting tension and a subtle sense of hope. Highgarden scribes, working under cover of night, exchanged letters with Daenerys Targaryen's closest advisors. The response came swiftly enough. A carefully crafted missive that invited Margaery or another member of her family to a secret parley on Dragonstone. It was to be a place of meeting once the Targaryen queen arrived in Westeros. The letter bore the seal of a dragon in bright red wax, the edges crisp and well-finished, as though meant to impress. We invite you, Lady Margaery Tyrell, to meet with Queen Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen, Mother of Dragons, the Breaker of Chains, rightful Queen of the Undulls and the First Men, Protector of the Seven Kingdoms. Together, we will discuss terms for an alliance that shall benefit House Tyrell and all the Reach. Such was the gist of it, though couched in flowery language. Margaery remembered reading it by the flicker of a candle, feeling the weight of possibility in every word. That was the first step. If she went, she would no longer be able to feign neutrality to the Lannisters. A direct meeting was treason in all but name. The next challenge was ensuring that her father and grandmother would support her departure. Mace Tyrell, for all his pomp, agreed that she was the best envoy. Olenna would remain in Highgarden, orchestrating the defense of the Reach and fending off Lannister spies. Willis Tyrell, her eldest brother, too wounded from an old tourney accident to make the journey, would oversee local governance. Garland, fiercely loyal to the family, pledged to gather the Knights of the Reach if there was a sign of a Lannister invasion. Thus, it fell to Margaery to travel discreetly to Dragonstone. Only a handful of loyal retainers accompanied her, enough to appear respectable, but not enough to arouse suspicion from passing eyes. They rode out before dawn one morning, a small band with minimal pageantry. The roads outside Highgarden were quiet. Commoners toiled in the fields, harvesting the last wave of summer crops. A hush seemed to follow Margaery as she passed, though many recognized her and bowed. She offered them a warm smile. She always took care to do so, especially now, for she hoped that if war came, these people would trust her intentions. The journey by land took many days, crossing from the heart of the Reach toward the Stormlands coast. Margaery could not risk traveling the King's Road. Word might reach the Lannisters of her progress, or worse, she might be intercepted. So she and her retinue took lesser-used routes, winding through hills and forests, sometimes doubling back to throw off potential pursuers. She had chosen men she trusted implicitly, each sworn to House Tyrell for years, each with families of their own who would suffer if they betrayed her. Still, Margaery felt tension coil in her stomach with each league they put behind them. Danger lurked at every turn in these times. Eventually, they arrived at a small fishing village on the coast, where a ship, provided in secret by Targaryen agents, was waiting. The vessel was not large, but it was swift, and the captain was a silent, weathered man who asked no questions. Margaery boarded with her retinue just before dusk. The sails caught the wind, and the vessel slipped away from the dock under the cover of the gathering night. Margaery stood on the deck, one hand wrapped around the railing, sea spray flicking up into her face. She breathed in the salt air. A swirling in her stomach reminded her she was crossing into the unknown, in more ways than one. But she did not flinch. She thought of her grandmother's wisdom. They must never appear weak. Whatever trepidation she felt, she would keep it hidden behind a gracious smile and keen eyes. It took a day and a half at sea to reach Dragonstone. Jagged black rocks jutted from the ocean, and the fortress rose above them, a looming edifice carved by ancient Valyrian magic into the shape of dragons. As their ship approached, Margaery thought she glimpsed a swirl of dark wings across the sky. But it was too distant to be certain. The sea churned in choppy waves that sprayed the deck. Finally, the ship anchored in the harbor. A small party of Unsullied, clad in dark leather and polished helms, awaited her. Their spears rose in perfect unison at the sight of her disembarking. Grey Worm, their commander, stepped forward and inclined his head in greeting. Margaery curtsied in return, showing a token of respect. Behind Grey Worm stood a woman with close-cropped hair and an unwavering gaze. Missandei, Margaery deduced from the rumors. She wore practical clothing in earthen tones, and though she looked slender, her composure radiated confidence. "Lady Margaery Tyrell," Missandei said in a clear voice. "I am Missandei of Noth, advisor to Queen Daenerys Targaryen. She awaits you within the castle, if you will follow us." Margaery offered her a calm smile. "I thank you for the welcome, Missandei. I look forward to meeting her grace." She gave a slight gesture to her own retinue, indicating they should keep close but remain respectful. The Unsullied parted to allow them through. The path up to the fortress was steep and lined with torches. Margaery listened to the slow crunch of her boots on the stone. Memories of King's Landing, of the Red Keep and its labyrinthine corridors, flickered through her mind, but she dismissed them. She had to focus on the present. A strong wind whipped at her cloak, carrying the faint smell of sulfur from beneath Dragonstone. They said the air was thick with the memory of dragonfire, and Margaery believed it. She finally arrived at the great doors that led into the main hall. The black stone interior was lit by sparse torches, shadows dancing along the walls. Long, narrow windows admitted thin beams of the dying daylight. There, in front of the massive fireplace, stood Daenerys Targaryen. Margaery had often heard the Targaryen queen described in song and rumor, silver-haired, slender, yet fierce. Still, seeing her in person made Margaery's heart skip a beat. Daenerys wore a fitted gown of dark material, edged with subtle hints of red that matched the Targaryen sigil. Upon her shoulders rested a mantle fashioned like dragon scales. Her hair, a pale platinum, was braided away from her face in several intricate plaits, revealing sharp cheekbones and a gaze that seemed to radiate quiet intensity. At her side stood Tyrion Lannister, which gave Margaery a momentary start. He had been a husband, however briefly, to Sansa Stark and had once served as the hand of the king in King's Landing. Now he was apparently the hand of the queen to Daenerys Targaryen. How the winds of fortune blew. Tyrion inclined his head at Margaery with a hint of a smile, which she returned, storing away 1,000 questions for later. Daenerys stepped forward, and Margaery sank into a graceful curtsy. "Your Grace," she said, letting her voice ring clear in the chamber. "I am honored by your invitation." Daenerys regarded her with an unreadable expression before dipping her head in acknowledgement. "Lady Margaery Tyrell, I am pleased you have come." Her voice was softer than Margaery had expected, but it carried an undercurrent of steel. "I have heard much about you. Rise, please. We have much to discuss." Margaery rose slowly. Their eyes met, violet on hazel, and Margaery felt a subtle hum of tension. This was a queen who had walked through fire. She reminded herself not to show any hint of intimidation. "I bring regards from my grandmother, Olenna Tyrell," Margaery said. "We have received your letters, and we believe it is time to consider the future of Westeros with open eyes." Daenerys tilted her head. "The future belongs to the people of Westeros, not merely those who sit in high seats. Yet, of course, we need the great houses. Lady Margaery, will you and your family stand with me when I press my claim on the Iron Throne?" Direct, Margaery thought. She appreciated that. But forging an alliance demanded more than directness. "Your Grace," she said, smiling warmly. My family has always wanted what is best for the Reach and its people. We are prepared to lend our support to a monarch who can bring stability, justice, and prosperity to the realm. However, we have been entangled with the Lannisters through various circumstances. If we break with the crown in King's Landing, we would risk war on our own doorstep. Will you be able to protect the Reach if we declare for you? Tyrion spoke then. We do not intend for House Tyrell to stand alone against Cersei's armies. Indeed, I expect that when news spreads of your defection, other houses long oppressed by Lannister influence may rally as well. Furthermore, we have allies from the north, the Vale, and possibly Dorne. Daenerys nodded. We also have the Dothraki, the Unsullied, and... She paused, glancing toward the dark windows. Margaery sensed a tremor in the air. I have 3 dragons, Lady Margaery. I do not say this to threaten, but to reassure. King's Landing will not stand against me for long. If House Tyrell joins me, the harvests and wealth of the Reach will remain safe. You have my word. Margaery's lips parted slightly. She wondered if the Queen truly believed so fervently in her own ability to keep the war from their lands, or if it was posturing. Still, the presence of dragons would tilt the scales in any conflict. Margaery decided to press further. We Tyrells believe in forging a stable realm. My grandmother has made it clear that she seeks to avenge herself upon Queen Cersei for various injustices, and I too have endured enough slights. Yet our support depends on the promises we secure. Will the Targaryen reign be one of tyranny, or will you seek a new way, as some say you did in Essos? Daenerys studied her, then took a step closer. The torches cast shifting light across her features. I have freed thousands from slavery across the sea. I toppled men who believed cruelty was their birthright. Do I expect to rule? Yes. It is my birthright stolen from my family. But I do not intend to be another tyrant. I want to break the wheel that has crushed the common folk beneath it for centuries. I want a realm where the lords do not fear a mad king, and the small folk need not cower under the whims of the powerful. This is my goal, Lady Margaery. But I am no fool. I know the great houses hold sway over large territories. Thus, alliances must be formed. A flicker of a smile touched Margaery's lips. The Queen's words sounded lofty, almost poetic, but so did many claims to power. Still, Margaery discerned a core of sincerity in Daenerys. Something about the way she spoke of freeing slaves, the authenticity in her tone, made Margaery believe that the Queen had seen real suffering and had tried to end it. That, in turn, appealed to Margaery's sense of statesmanship. If Daenerys truly aimed to bring a better order, perhaps House Tyrell could be part of that future. I admire your conviction, your grace, Margaery said softly. Perhaps I share more of your vision than you realize. The common folk of the Reach are the backbone of our house's prosperity. We do not forget them, nor do we seek to keep them in despair. If you can assure me that House Tyrell shall be secure under your rule, our lands, our titles, and that we shall have a voice in the governance of the realm, then I will do all in my power to bring my family to your cause. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Tyrion, who gave a slight nod. Then she faced Margaery again, her posture regal. I can assure you of all these things, Lady Margaery. You shall maintain dominion over the Reach, and you shall hold a seat in my new council should I gain the throne. She raised her voice enough that it seemed to echo in the chamber. Swear to me your loyalty, and I will protect you from any Lannister reprisals. Together, we will show Cersei that her time is over. Margaery felt the moment settle around them. This was the turning point. She bowed her head, her brown curls falling over her shoulders. I pledge myself to your cause, Daenerys Stormborn, she said, feeling the finality in her words. I will return to Highgarden and gather my family's strength. When the time comes to march on King's Landing, you will have the full support of the Reach. Silence filled the hall before Daenerys took a measured step forward. For an instant, her gaze softened. You have chosen wisely, Lady Margaery. I thank you for your faith. Tyrion, please see to it that Lady Margaery and her retainers are well accommodated. We have much more to discuss, but for now let her rest. The sea crossing must have been taxing. Tyrion bowed with a slight flourish. "At once, your grace." Margaery curtsied deeply once more. As she did, she could sense the watchful eyes of the Unsullied, of Missandei, of everyone. Rising, she followed Tyrion, who led her through winding corridors carved in black stone. The flickering torches revealed strange dragon motifs in the walls, haunting and magnificent. When they arrived at the chambers prepared for her, Tyrion motioned for her attendants to follow the servants into adjoining rooms. He lingered in the doorway to speak with her privately. "My lady," he said, "it's been some time since we last crossed paths. I hope you find Dragonstone hospitable enough." "Lord Tyrion," she replied with a polite bow of her head, "I recall your presence in King's Landing. You once tried to maintain some semblance of justice there, if I recall correctly." He let out a short chuckle. "Justice in King's Landing is a rarer commodity than Valyrian steel. But yes, I did what I could. And now I serve Daenerys Targaryen as her hand. I must confess I'm relieved to see a familiar face from Westeros who doesn't wish to kill me. I have found that to be a scarcity these days." Margaery's lips curved in a wry smile. "I understand. The hostility in the capital made it difficult for even the most well-meaning to survive. It is why I returned to Highgarden when I had the chance. The situation became untenable for my family." She studied Tyrion. "So you believe in Daenerys Targaryen's cause?" He nodded. "I do. I've seen the difference she makes among those she rules. And I've seen enough Lannister cruelty to last a lifetime. My father may be gone, but Cersei stands in his stead, and her cruelty is more personal." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I hope you will find common ground with the Queen. Something tells me you two share a capacity for empathy and for ambition." Margaery tilted her head. "A curious combination, empathy and ambition. It's usually one or the other in those who seek the throne. But in your queen I sense something different. Perhaps we shall see if that difference can save us from yet another bitter war." Tyrion's face grew sober. "War is inevitable, Lady Margaery. But how that war is fought and how it ends is up to us. If House Tyrell and House Targaryen can stand together, we might spare countless lives." She sighed softly. "Then let us see it done. Good night, Lord Tyrion." He bowed and withdrew, leaving her alone in the quiet chamber. Margaery removed her cloak, letting it slip from her shoulders into the waiting hands of a lady's maid who had just arrived. The room smelled of sea salt and smoke from a small brazier. She stood by the narrow window and stared out at the dark waters rolling beneath a moonlit sky. A swirl of wind lifted her hair, sending a chill along her arms. Beyond the horizon lay the rest of Westeros. And soon, she would return to the Reach carrying a promise that might decide the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Over the course of the next several days, Margaery remained at Dragonstone to finalize the terms of alliance. She toured the fortress by day, escorted by Missandei or an Unsullied guard, learning more about Daenerys' forces. The discipline of the Unsullied was impressive, and the raw ferocity of the Dothraki, who had set up a makeshift camp on the beaches, was awe-inspiring, if not terrifying. On the ramparts, she once glimpsed two great shapes circling overhead, black silhouettes against a cloudy sky. The dragons. A single mighty roar set her heart pounding. She and Daenerys spoke at length. Margaery found her to be both commanding and earnest, determined to restore her family's legacy, but also deeply affected by the injustices she had seen. Whenever Margaery gently probed about the Mad King's history, Daenerys' eyes hardened, and she stated firmly that she was not her father. Margaery believed her, but she also recognized that power could twist even the best of intentions. She resolved to keep her eyes open. Tyrion, for his part, acted as mediator, ensuring both sides felt respected. They worked out the specifics. Upon House Tyrell's open declaration of support, Daenerys would move some of her forces to the Reach to defend against any Lannister reprisal. In return, Margaery pledged Highgarden's storied knights and food supplies to feed the Targaryen host. Logistics were painstaking, but Margaery thrived in such discussions. She navigated them with a careful balance of courtesy and assertiveness, ensuring her house's interests would be safeguarded. When at last the time came for Margaery to return home, The queen convened a small farewell gathering in the great hall, only those closest to her present. Daenerys took Margaery's hands in her own. A hush fell over the chamber as the queen spoke. "You go to your family with our agreement. My thanks to you, Lady Margaery, for placing your trust in me. I swear by the Mother of Dragons that I will not fail you or your house. When the time is right, we will strike at the heart of the Lannister power." Margaery bowed her head, her voice quiet yet resolute. "Then I shall prepare the Reach for that day. Let us bring justice to Westeros together." And so she departed, crossing the sea once more under cover of night, forging back through the forests and hills until the tall spires of Highgarden came into view. The journey was fraught with near encounters, as Lannister patrols had begun to scour the countryside, but Margaery's loyal guards managed to avoid them, traveling by unmarked roads and using stealth when necessary. Highgarden welcomed her back with cautious relief. Olenna greeted her in private, quietly pleased when Margaery recounted the details of the negotiations. "The alliance is made, then?" Olenna asked, drumming her fingers on the armrest of her chair. Margaery nodded. "We must make a public declaration soon, otherwise the Queen will lose faith that we can be relied upon." Olenna's eyes narrowed. "And once we do, the Lannisters will come down on us like vultures if they think we've turned. We must be ready. I have sent out ravens to gather our bannermen. We'll field as large an army as we can manage and call in old debts. The Tyrell name still carries weight among the lords of the Reach." Margaery thought of the knights she had seen in King's Landing, many of them gone off to fight in the north against the Boltons, or so rumor said. The realm was scattered with conflict. "We have to show a united front," she said, "and perhaps with Daenerys's dragons, the Lannisters won't dare burn the fields they themselves rely on for food." Olenna smirked. "Oh, I think they might be that desperate, but let's hope your new friend shows up quickly, or we may have ashes where our rose gardens once stood." Despite the bleakness of that remark, Margaery felt a sense of mounting determination. She had chosen her side. Better to stand with fire and hope than remain shackled to the pit of vipers that was King's Landing under Cersei's rule. She nodded once at her grandmother. "I will do my best to inspire loyalty in the lesser lords. Many resent Lannister arrogance already. We'll remind them that the Targaryen claim is older and that Daenerys offers not only power, but a chance at a better realm." "Clever girl," Olenna said, a faint note of pride in her voice. "Go on, then. Work your charms. I'll be behind you with the threat of my thorns if they prove stubborn." She summoned the lords and ladies of the Reach to Highgarden for a grand feast, using the pretext of a harvest celebration. The banners of House Tyrell billowed in the warm breeze, gold roses on a field of green, shining in the late afternoon sun. The main courtyard bustled with activity as servants laid out trestle tables stacked with bread, wine, and fresh produce. Over the hall's main doors hung a massive tapestry depicting the bounty of the Reach. The air hummed with the chatter of dozens of visitors, each mindful of the uncertain times but cheered temporarily by the promise of good food and the presence of Lady Margaery, who was beloved throughout the region for her graciousness and philanthropy. They dined on roast duck, spiced carrots, honeyed wine, and other delicacies. Margaery moved among the guests with effortless poise, sharing laughter, inquiring after the well-being of their families, recalling names and details that made each lord feel acknowledged. Many times she heard the phrase, "We are so grateful to be under Tyrell protection in these dark times," or, "We shall follow your lead, my lady, wherever it may take us." Each statement set her heart racing with possibilities. When the time came for her to speak, she rose from the high seat, softly requesting the attention of the gathered lords and ladies. The clinking of cups and plates subsided as all eyes turned to her. She wore a gown of pale green trimmed with gold, the colors of House Tyrell, and her hair was coiled in an elegant bun. A hush settled over the courtyard. "My friends," she began, her voice clear and warm, "I welcome you all here today to celebrate the harvest, the bounty that the Reach has provided year after year. It is a sign of our good fortune, our diligence, and our love for this land. But even as we enjoy this feast, we cannot ignore the mounting storms on the horizon. were looms. The Lannisters hold King's Landing under Queen Cersei, and we all know her capacity for vengeance. Many of our men have fought battles far from home, and we have lost loved ones. The question we must ask is, where do we stand now, and how do we protect the Reach from the inevitable clash? Some men shuffled in their seats. A few cast uncertain glances at one another. Margaery continued, letting just a hint of urgency creep into her tone. I have recently learned that Daenerys Targaryen, the last surviving heir of King Aerys, has arrived in Westeros with a formidable host, including dragons not seen for centuries. She has freed slaves in Essos, toppled cruel masters, and now seeks to claim her ancestral throne. I understand you may have reservations. A Targaryen on the Iron Throne stirs memories of the past. But this new Targaryen queen is not her father. She has promised clemency to all who join her cause. She desires peace and prosperity, and she vows to protect her allies from any who would do them harm. A murmur ran through the gathering. Margaery raised a hand to quiet them, her eyes shining with conviction. I have spoken with her. She has pledged that should House Tyrell stand with her, the Reach will remain ours. Our fields will not burn. Our harvest will not be spoiled. Instead, we will be at the forefront of forging a new era for Westeros, one where cruelty does not reign from the Red Keep. I ask you all, lords and ladies of the Reach, to trust me as you have trusted me before. Together, we can ensure that the war passes swiftly and that the devastation we have seen elsewhere does not destroy our homeland. Will you lend me your voices, your swords, and your hearts in support of Daenerys Targaryen? There was a moment of heavy silence. Margaery could feel her heartbeat in her throat. Then, slowly, one of the lords rose. Lord Tarly had died in another version of events, but in this story we may suppose he stood uncertain, grim-faced. Another lord, Redwine perhaps, stepped forward. Then a third, an older man with a thick beard. Margaery saw the cautious acceptance in their eyes. Many of them wanted to rid themselves of Lannister debts and burdens. The chance to be on the winning side, especially one rumored to have dragons, proved alluring. "We stand with you, Lady Margaery," one called out. "For the Reach," shouted another. A chorus rose, echoing around the courtyard. Some voices sounded reluctant, but the tide had turned. Once the majority declared for her, the rest followed. Margaery smiled, feeling a flood of relief. A single tear, unnoticed by all, welled in her eye. She blinked it away. "Then let us prepare, my lords and ladies, for soon enough, the new queen will call on us, and I know you will stand proud as the knights and guardians of the Reach." Cheers erupted, and the feast resumed with renewed fervor. Margaery allowed herself a moment to savor the triumph, even as the weight of responsibility settled upon her shoulders. She had, in a single grand gesture, shifted the loyalty of the Reach away from King's Landing to Dragonstone. All that remained was to see if Daenerys would hold to her promises, and if they could withstand the wrath of the Lion Queen. It did not take long for the news of Highgarden's declaration to reach King's Landing. Margaery expected a swift response, and indeed it came in the form of a raven delivered in the dead of night. The message was written in harsh, angular script. It bore the royal seal of Cersei Lannister, and its words were laced with threats. If the Tyrells did not recant their treason immediately, if they did not reaffirm their loyalty to the Iron Throne, they would be branded outlaws. Any Tyrell found to be conspiring with the usurper Daenerys Targaryen would meet the crown's full wrath. Margaery read the letter in her solar by candlelight, her face remaining impassive. Once done, she placed it down carefully. Olenna, seated across from her, snorted in contempt. "She must think fear alone will bring us to heel. The woman is delirious." "She's desperate," Margaery agreed, "and that desperation makes her dangerous. Cersei will not let this slide. She might march on us with whatever forces remain loyal to her. The question is, do we wait here for her approach, or do we attempt to strike first?" Olenna pursed her lips. The Lannisters still have the gold cloaks in King's Landing, and possibly the remnants of the Tywin-era loyalists. Yet Jaime Lannister is no fool. He may try to rally other houses. We must hope our new ally arrives soon with her dragons. Margaery nodded gravely. In truth, relying on Daenerys to make the first move worried her. The queen had to secure her own position in Dragonstone, gather more allies, and possibly negotiate with the North. War would not wait. The Tyrells needed to show resolve. "We will keep our forces ready to march," she said. "If the Lannisters move, we meet them on the field. We have the advantage of numbers here in the Reach. Let's hope it's enough." Days turned to weeks. Ravens flew back and forth. Lannister incursions were reported near the borders with the Stormlands, but no full-scale assault came. Still, tension thrummed in the air like a drawn bowstring. Margaery spent her days in councils with generals, ensuring that supplies were stored in safe keeps, that the roads were guarded. She also continued her charitable works, distributing grain to smaller villages to keep them from starvation. If the war turned ugly, she wanted the small folk to remember House Tyrell's kindness. Then came the signal she had been waiting for. A raven arrived from Dragonstone, bearing the Targaryen seal. The queen was on the move. Reports told of her unsullied crossing Blackwater Bay, establishing a foothold near Massey's Hook. Her Dothraki horde could not be far behind. The letter was succinct. Daenerys requested a meeting of her allied lords in the fields outside of Tumbleton, near the Mander. Margaery wasted no time. She called her banners, and the Tyrell army, thousands strong, began to march. Armored knights carried the rose sigil on their shields. Archers and foot soldiers trailed behind, supply wagons laden with food, tents, and arms. At the head of the host rode Margaery, clad in lighter riding armor of green leather adorned with gold filigree. She was no warrior, but she had insisted on appearing in some form of protective gear. Her banner fluttered overhead, the golden rose resplendent in the sunlight. Olenna rode in a carriage behind her, but even from there, she directed the lines of supply and scolded any captain who showed the slightest disorganization. Mace Tyrell, her father, might have been content to spout pompous declarations, but Olenna's sharp mind ensured the army remained in tight formation. Garland Tyrell, skilled with the sword, commanded the vanguard, while the lesser Tyrell cousins led various cavalry units. When they reached Tumbleton's rolling hills, they beheld a sight that made even the bravest knights pause in awe. Thousands of Unsullied stood in neat ranks, their spears glinting under the sun. A short distance away, columns of Dothraki riders moved like restless shadows across the plain, their aurochs catching the sunlight. Atop a small rise, near a cluster of trees, stood the figure of Daenerys Targaryen, flanked by her most trusted advisors. Margaery recognized Tyrion's stocky form and the tall, lean silhouette of Grey Worm. With a signal from Garland, the Tyrell host came to a halt. Margaery urged her horse forward. The plan was for a small group to parley. Margaery, Olenna, a few chosen knights, and Daenerys's closest retinue. They advanced carefully, the sound of hooves muffled by the grassy field. Margaery could feel her heart pounding in her chest. So many lives, so much hope, hinged on this alliance. She glanced over her shoulder at Olenna, who gave a firm nod. Then she dismounted gracefully, letting her horse be led away by a squire. Daenerys approached, also on foot, wearing a regal black cloak. A gentle breeze ruffled her silver hair. Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm stood behind her. The queen's expression was calm, her violet eyes scanning the gathered knights of the Reach. Olenna was helped down from her carriage, looking regal yet fierce. "Lady Margaery," Daenerys said, her voice carrying easily in the open air. "Lady Olenna, pleases me to see you here, with such a splendid host." The golden rose indeed blossoms far and wide. Olenna managed a tight smile. "Your Grace, we Tyrells have always known how to cultivate beauty, and how to protect it when threatened." She flicked her gaze over the Unsullied. "You've brought an impressive army." Daenerys inclined her head in thanks. "They are loyal beyond measure, and we have more allies on the way. The Ironborn under Yara Greyjoy, Dorne under the new prince. There is a faint hope the North might join us as well, once certain disputes are settled. But for now, I am proud to stand with House Tyrell." We will march upon King's Landing soon. Once Cersei is deposed, I will honor all the terms we discussed." Margaery glanced over at Tyrion, who wore a look of satisfaction. "We have planned our assault carefully," he said. "With the Tyrell host, we will encircle King's Landing, preventing any reinforcements from the Reach or the Westerlands. Meanwhile, the Unsullied and Dothraki will strike key fortifications. With the dragons overhead, it should not be a long siege. However, we must be wary of the civilian population. We do not wish to burn the city if it can be avoided." Olenna let out a short laugh. "Avoided, you say? Cersei may prefer to burn the city rather than relinquish her power. She has wildfire caches, if the rumors are to be believed." Daenerys's jaw tightened. "She can attempt to burn it, but I will not let her harm innocent lives if it can be prevented. My dragons are potent weapons, but I will not deploy them indiscriminately." Margaery studied Daenerys's expression. The queen seemed resolute, unwavering in her moral stance. It was admirable and also dangerous. Cersei's cunning could exploit that sense of mercy. Yet Margaery preferred not to see King's Landing in flames. Too many times, she had walked those streets, seen the suffering. If there was a chance to win without mass slaughter, she would gladly take it. "We are with you," Margaery said, meeting Daenerys's gaze. "The Lords of the Reach are ready to fight for your claim. Let us end Cersei's tyranny before more lives are lost." Daenerys's lips curved in a determined smile. "Then let us ride, and soon the Iron Throne will no longer be a seat for lions, but for dragons and roses alike." With that, the combined forces began to move, a grand column stretching as far as the eye could see. War horns echoed over the fields, and banners of both the dragon and the rose flapped in the wind. Margaery and Daenerys rode side by side at times, discussing strategies. Occasionally, Daenerys would break off to oversee her Dothraki scouts or to reassure the Unsullied lines, while Margaery managed the logistical demands of her own troops. Their alliance, though still newly minted, functioned with surprising cohesion, each leader playing to her strengths. As the days passed, they drew nearer to King's Landing. Scouts reported that Jaime Lannister had rallied what troops he could from the Crownlands, but it was a paltry force compared to the gathering might of House Tyrell and the Targaryen armies. Still, Margaery did not underestimate the resourcefulness of the Lannisters. She had lived among them, married into their world, and seen the cunning behind their eyes. Cersei would not surrender easily, and the defenders of King's Landing might use the city's walls to their advantage. On the morning of their final approach, the sky dawned gray, clouds rolling in from the east. The city's outline rose against the horizon, the Red Keep perched on its rocky promontory. Margaery felt a tightness in her chest. Memories of the cobblestone streets, the towering Great September, now destroyed in Cersei's madness, and the twisted politics of the court all came flooding back. She urged her horse forward, passing between ranks of armored knights. Many gave her a respectful salute. The camp was set up in a broad arc to the south of the city, out of range of scorpion bolts and catapults. Margaery observed the Dothraki forging closer to the northern roads, the Unsullied forming a disciplined front line. Tyrion was busy conferring with a group of commanders on the best approach for the siege. Daenerys stood near the ridge, her hair whipping about in the stiff wind, scanning the walls of King's Landing as if she could see her destiny etched in the red stone. A roar shattered the calm. It was the cry of a dragon, deep and resonant. Margaery looked up, her breath catching in her throat. A massive shape soared overhead, wings blotting out the sun for an instant. Drogon, if she recalled the name correctly. The beast circled, then landed heavily on a rocky outcrop, tail lashing, black scales shimmering in the weak daylight. Daenerys watched her mount with pride, but also with a tempered seriousness. This was not a creature to unleash lightly. The queen turned to Margaery. "We'll issue one final call for surrender," she said, her voice resolute. "If Cersei refuses, we will commence the siege. Are you prepared?" Margaery nodded. She thought of the thousands of innocent people in King's Landing who might starve or die in the crossfire. "I'm prepared, but let us hope reason prevails." A grim smile touched Daenerys's lips. "I don't believe Cersei Lannister has any reason left in her. Still, I will give her the chance." So they sent riders to the city gate under a white banner, carrying Daenerys's terms. Open the gates, surrender Cersei and any key members of her regime, and recognize Daenerys as the rightful queen. In exchange, King's Landing would be spared. Food would be shared to feed the populace. No reprisals would be taken on those who simply obeyed the rightful queen's commands. The riders returned at sunset, bearing the expected reply. Cersei refused to yield. Her words, spoken through Jaime Lannister, were typical of her disdain. "This city will not bow to a foreign usurper, nor to the false rose who turned traitor. Let them come, and they shall see what a Lannister does to traitors." Margaery stood outside her tent, the message in hand, the flaps rustling in the wind. She crumpled the parchment, jaw clenched. The final piece was in place. "She wants to fight," she said to Daenerys, who stood at her side, clad in warlike attire and a flowing black cloak. "She would rather burn than bend. Will you hold to your plan of a careful siege?" Daenerys's eyes flickered with dragonfire. "I will try to keep the destruction contained. The city's walls will fall easily under dragonfire, but I do not want to kill the innocent. We will focus on the Red Keep on the Lannister strongholds. But if Cersei has set wildfire, we must be careful not to ignite it across the city." Tyrion, who was nearby, nodded gravely. "We'll have scouts watch the rooftops. If they see signs of wildfire, we'll adjust. But we must press the attack quickly, before she can enact any catastrophic plans." That night, tension suffused the camp. The Tyrell knights polished their armor, whispered prayers to the Seven, and remembered the camaraderie that had bound them. Margaery walked among them, offering reassuring words. She might not be a soldier, but her mere presence inspired hope. Meanwhile, the Unsullied prepared in stoic silence, and the Dothraki sharpened their araks under the flickering torchlight, trading jokes and bold boasts about the coming battle. Just before dawn, they moved into position. Daenerys mounted Drogon, the colossal dragon roaring his challenge to the sky. The other two dragons, Regal and Viserion, circled overhead, each bearing an experienced rider. The Tyrell army formed ranks to the south, while the Unsullied marched to the city's northern gates, accompanied by a mass of Dothraki screamers eager to storm the open roads. Margaery stayed atop her mare, near Olenna's carriage, behind the main line. She was too valuable to risk in the thick of battle, yet she would be close enough to witness the tide of war. Daenerys soared overhead, a streak of black and scarlet against the gray sky. The next hour would decide everything. A horn sounded in the distance. Siege towers rumbled forward. The Tyrell archers knocked arrows, and at Margaery's signal, they fired a volley aimed at the battlements. Arrows hissed through the air, answered by crossbow bolts from the city walls. Shouts rose. Men fell. The clang of steel against stone echoed over the plain. Suddenly, a giant shadow swept over the ramparts. Drogon. With a roar that made the ground tremble, he unleashed a torrent of flame on the main gate. The thick wooden beams ignited, and the defenders scattered in panic. A second dragon dove at the western walls, spouting fire along the crenellations. King's Landing had not seen the fury of dragons in over a century, and the effect was devastating. Parts of the wall collapsed under the intense heat, and entire sections of rampart crumbled. The Tyrell knights surged forward, pouring through the breaches. Margaery watched with her heart pounding as her men clashed with the Lannister forces. Steel clanged, men shouted and screamed. Smoke billowed from the fires, drifting in thick clouds over the battlefield. The chaos was immense, a swirl of color and movement that threatened to overwhelm the senses. Olenna, from her vantage point in a watchtower wagon, directed her own small retinue of crossbowmen. Margaery could see her grandmother's eyes glittering fiercely as she oversaw the attack. "Aim for the scorpions," Olenna cried, pointing where the defenders had hastily erected massive crossbows designed to wound dragons. "Take them out before they can fire." A group of Tyrell knights swept around the flanks, smashing into the Lannister lines. Margaery recognized Garland leading them, his sword flashing in arcs of deadly precision. The Lannisters fought back grimly, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Some broke ranks to retreat deeper into the city. Daenerys urged Drogon higher, scanning the field for any sign of wildfire. Tyrion had warned that a green glow might appear if Cersei tried to detonate caches beneath the streets. As Drogon soared, Margaery felt a ripple of unease. Cersei might be cunning enough to try something desperate at the last moment. But time was not on Cersei's side. The city's gates burst open, the Unsullied flooding in from the north, taking the defenders by surprise. The Dothraki charged with wild battle cries, their horses galloping through the rubble as they chased fleeing Lannister soldiers. Margaery's banners advanced steadily, led by brave captains who had sworn to see this through. Soon the outer defenses fell. The city's gates were under Targaryen control, and thousands of civilians cowered behind barred doors. Margaery urged her horse forward into the city's outskirts. Smoke curled from the battered walls, bodies lying in the streets. War was never a pretty sight, and her stomach churned at the horror. But she had to remain strong. As she rode, she called out to any living souls she passed, telling them to stay indoors, to remain safe. "We do not come to slaughter civilians," she cried, hoping her words might calm the panicked masses. Ahead, the Red Keep loomed, tall and forbidding. There, upon the ramparts, Lannister archers still fired bolts. But the dragons circled overhead, each pass bringing more devastation. Some sections of the keep's curtain walls were ablaze. Margaery heard a deep rumbling from within the castle, perhaps a sign of collapsed tunnels or a last-minute stand. Suddenly, a trio of scorpions aimed skyward, releasing heavy bolts. One of the dragons, Viserion, lurched mid-flight, a bolt scraping along his flank. He roared in pain, spouting flame erratically. Daenerys, seeing this from Drogon, dived toward the scorpions, unleashing a furious torrent of flame that melted the metal arms of the machines and sent their crews scattering. The defenders were pushed back. Within the Red Keep, pockets of Lannister soldiers still fought, but the tide was turning irrevocably. Even Jaime Lannister, if rumor was correct, had tried to urge Cersei to surrender. She refused, of course. Soon enough, Dothraki riders breached the gates of the keep. They and the Unsullied methodically cleared the corridors. Word spread among the invading forces. Cersei had barricaded herself in the throne room with her personal guard. Margaery dismounted, leaving her horse with a squire. She was loath to charge into the keep's depths, but she needed to see this through. Alongside a few trusted knights, she entered the charred courtyard. It was littered with debris. Dragonfire had scorched entire sections, but not all, as Daenerys had deliberately minimized the destruction. Margaery stepped over broken marble tiles, passing bodies of Lannister guards, her heart clenching with each step. War was a terrible necessity. They reached the entry to the throne room, the massive doors partially collapsed. Inside, Margaery heard shouts and the clang of steel. She slipped through a side entrance, her knights in tow. What she saw next was etched forever in her memory. Daenerys stood near the foot of the Iron Throne itself, Drogon perched outside on the remains of a shattered balcony. Jaime Lannister stood in front of Cersei, sword drawn, but his posture uncertain, as though he were torn. Cersei clutched a dagger, her eyes wild, her once golden hair cropped close to her skull. The remains of her Queensguard lay scattered in the shattered hall. Tyrion stood to the side, silently watching. "Margaery," Cersei hissed, her voice raw. She spat the name like a curse. "You traitorous rose. How dare you bring dragons to our doorstep?" Margaery held her ground, her chin lifted. "You left us no choice, your grace. You would have destroyed us all if we stayed at your side." Cersei's lips curled in fury. "You have no idea the forces you meddle with." Her gaze flicked to Daenerys, who observed her with a cold fire in her violet eyes. "Mad King's daughter," Cersei snarled. "You're just like him. You'll burn us all." Daenerys stepped forward, unafraid. "I am not my father," she said in a voice that rang through the cavernous hall. and I have given you every chance to surrender. This city has seen enough blood." Cersei let out a ragged laugh. "You think to sit the Iron Throne? You think the people will love you? They are mine, and if I must burn them before I let you have them." Jaime turned, alarmed. "Cersei, please. It's over. Let's end this." Cersei's eyes darted to him, wild and distraught. She raised the dagger, her hand shaking. "Don't you dare betray me." Before anyone could move, she lunged at Daenerys, a shriek ripping from her throat. Jaime tried to intervene, but was too slow. However, Daenerys had spent too many years in war to be caught off guard. She pivoted, dodging the blow. Grey Worm stepped forward, but Cersei managed a wild slash that cut across Daenerys' arm, drawing blood. Daenerys hissed in pain. In a blur of motion, Jaime wrestled the dagger from Cersei, and she fell to the floor, her eyes burning with hatred. Tyrion rushed forward to help Daenerys, who pressed a hand to her bleeding arm. Margaery stepped closer, her heart pounding. She could see the anguish on Jaime's face, the twisted despair as he realized his sister had truly lost all reason. Daenerys, breathing hard, signaled Grey Worm to pull Cersei up. The former queen glared, her pride unbroken despite her defeat. Blood smeared the marble floor. "You will not have this throne," she spat. "No matter what you do, you will never." She broke off in a deranged laugh, her mind unraveling. Margaery felt pity, despite everything. How far the mighty had fallen. Daenerys stared at her foe, her own face etched with pain and disgust. "I gave you a chance to surrender," the Dragon Queen whispered. "For the sake of the city you once ruled. You refused. Now your reign is ended." She glanced at Tyrion, then at Margaery, who nodded in solemn agreement. With that, Daenerys turned to Jaime, who still clutched the dagger he had taken from Cersei. He looked as though he might crumble under the weight of his own guilt. Daenerys spoke quietly. "She will stand trial for her crimes. There has been enough blood." Jaime exhaled, relief flickering in his eyes. He nodded. Grey Worm dragged Cersei away, ignoring her hysterical shrieks. Tyrion followed, ensuring she did not cause any more trouble. Margaery let out a shaky breath, stepping toward Daenerys, who still winced from her wounded arm. A wave of exhaustion passed over both of them. The city was theirs, the battle won. But the cost was great, and the scars would linger. Margaery gently touched Daenerys' arm. "Your Grace, you are hurt. We should find a maester, if one remains in the city." Daenerys nodded, her eyes drifting to the Iron Throne. It stood there, tall, jagged, and forged from 1,000 swords. "We have prevailed," she said, a tremor in her voice. "But let us not forget those who suffer beyond these walls. The war is done for now, but the realm needs rebuilding." Margaery felt a wave of relief and pride. She had stood beside Daenerys Targaryen, forging an alliance of roses and dragons that toppled the Lannister reign. Whatever came next, she hoped it would be a future shaped by compassion and strength alike. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "The common folk love you, child, and so long as they love you, you can be dangerous." If she used that power for good, perhaps she could help Daenerys forge a new age. She helped Daenerys toward the shattered doors of the throne room. The clamor of victory rolled through the corridors. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, shining down on King's Landing. Smoke still hung heavy in the air, but beneath it all, hope fluttered like a newborn bird. Margaery Tyrell, the Rose of Highgarden, had played her part in bringing a new queen to the throne. In that moment, as she guided Daenerys to receive aid and sought to calm the city's fears, she did not regret her choice. For all her ambition, Margaery had wanted something more than power, a chance to shape a better realm. Perhaps together they would do just that. Dawn broke over King's Landing beneath a sky still veined with charcoal clouds, remnants of yesterday's smoke drifting across the city's rooftops. Margaery stood on one of the Red Keep's high balconies, gazing out over the blackened ruins of the outer walls and the scattered devastation in the streets below. Though most of the fires had been extinguished, and though Daenerys's careful strategy had spared the majority of the city from mass destruction, there remained ugly pockets of ruin and acrid smolder. Somewhere in the distance, cries and faint sobs echoed in the hush of a capital awakened to its new monarch. She had barely slept. After the final victory in the throne room, men and women had raced through the corridors in a flurry of activity, carrying the wounded to makeshift triage centers, rounding up remaining pockets of Lannister loyalists, quelling bursts of panic among the populace. Margaery, exhausted from the surge of emotion and the weight of decision, had found only a few hours of rest in one of the less damaged chambers. Even then, her dreams had been haunted by images of the dragon's fire, by Cersei's wild eyes as she struck out, and by the knowledge that war, no matter how justified, always left scars. She ran a hand over the cold stone balustrade, letting the crisp dawn air rouse her senses. Across the yard below, Daenerys Targaryen emerged from a tall doorway, flanked by Missandei and Grey Worm. The queen wore a simple black cloak that fell to her boots, her injured arm expertly bandaged beneath her sleeve. The faint shadows under Daenerys's eyes betrayed her own fatigue. Yet even from this distance, Margaery sensed the resolve in her posture. Daenerys had not come all this way, fought so many battles, simply to waver now. Margaery drew a slow breath and descended the winding stairs into the courtyard. She passed unsullied guards who remained at attention, their faces blank behind their helmets. The Dothraki were scattered about the city. Some had made camp outside the walls, others were riding through the streets to maintain order, under strict orders from Daenerys not to loot or kill innocents. At intervals, Margaery glimpsed men and women cradling injuries or collapsed in exhaustion. A few called out to her with timid gratitude. She offered them comfort where she could, reassuring them that food would be distributed and that the new queen wanted peace, not cruelty. She found Daenerys by the stables. Tyrion was there, too, wearing the heavy cloak of the Hand of the Queen and a grave expression. A handful of Tyrell knights, Garland among them, had assembled in a cautious circle. Margaery approached, catching Tyrion mid-sentence. "Enough supply wagons to feed the city for at least a fortnight, provided we seize the granaries and confirm that the crown stores are intact." Tyrion exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "So many fled in panic yesterday that we need to set up distribution points. Starving small folk will be as dangerous as an armed revolt." Garland nodded. "My sister and I can handle the logistics. The Reach's harvests are plentiful. We can send for more if needed. But it will take time for caravans to arrive from Highgarden." Daenerys's gaze turned to Margaery, her tone weary but resolute. "Lady Margaery, you know this city and its people far better than I do. Will you help arrange the relief efforts? We must show the common folk that their new queen intends to protect and feed them, not starve them into submission." Margaery inclined her head. "Of course, Your Grace. I will coordinate with your officers to see that everyone is accounted for. Even the poorest parts of Flea Bottom must receive supplies. The more compassion we demonstrate now, the less fear and resentment will fester." Daenerys's eyes flickered with a hint of appreciation. "Thank you. The battle may be over, but the real work is just beginning." Tyrion cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Before we can address the city's needs in full, we must settle the matter of Cersei. She is being held under guard in her old royal apartments, or what's left of them. She has not spoken since she was disarmed, except to hurl the occasional insult at the guards. Queen Daenerys, what are your intentions for her?" A hush fell. Margaery saw how Daenerys's jaw tightened. She recalled the moment in the throne room when Cersei had slashed Daenerys's arm. Even more than the physical wound, there was the betrayal and viciousness. The Targaryen queen did not want to be her father, but justice would demand something. Margaery stood quietly, bracing herself for Daenerys's answer. "She will stand trial," Daenerys said finally, her voice low. "We will not cut her down in a vengeful rage. There has been enough slaughter. I want the realm to see that even the worst tyrant can face judgment openly." Garland glanced at Margaery, then ventured, "If that is your will, Your Grace, then House Tyrell will abide by it. We have no love for Cersei Lannister, but a public trial might invite unrest. "We can mitigate that," Tyrion said. "Hold the trial in the Red Keep's throne room, or perhaps even in front of the ruins of the Great September for symbolic resonance. That building no longer stands, courtesy of Cersei herself, but the courtyard before its remains might hold many onlookers." Daenerys's expression flickered. "I have not decided where the trial will take place, but it must be soon. The longer she remains a prisoner, the more time rumors have to swirl. Some may wish to see her return to power. Others might claim I keep her alive only for torment." She turned to Margaery, her gaze sharp. "Will you stand as a witness against her? Your family, and you in particular, have suffered at her hands." Margaery remembered her humiliations in King's Landing, the way the Faith militant had seized her brother Loras, the manner in which Cersei had toyed with power until everything burned. She stood straighter, schooling her face into calm composure. "Yes, I will speak, but I do not seek vengeance merely for vengeance's sake. If we hold a trial, it must be a testament to the realm that we forge a better path." Daenerys studied her, a slight smile curling the corners of her mouth. "Indeed, very well, we'll proceed in that manner. Tyrion, gather the relevant witnesses. But first, we must bring order to King's Landing. Lady Margaery, speak with the steward in the Red Keep's kitchens about rationing. Garland, I trust you to keep the Tyrell Knights in check. We want no looting, no reprisals. I refuse to let our victory turn into a wave of chaos." With the immediate tasks decided, they dispersed. Margaery returned to the Red Keep's interior, passing corridors still thick with dust and debris. She stepped around a collapsed archway, remembering how many times she'd walked these halls as Joffrey's bride, then as Tommen's queen. A lifetime ago, she thought. Now the tapestries were half-burned, the floor marred by blackened streaks. Soldiers camped in doorways, the insignia of the dragon or the rose pinned to their cloaks, while the last Lannister banners had been torn down and thrown in corners. She found the kitchens easily enough. The old staff had scattered during the battle, but a few cowering cooks and frightened servants had crept back, drawn by the promise of Daenerys's mercy. Margaery used her gentle manner to coax them out of hiding, promising safety. Once they recognized her, many sank into relieved bows, for they remembered her generosity and the times she had personally arranged food for the poor of King's Landing. Word spread quickly among them that Margaery Tyrell now served as an important counselor to the new queen. That knowledge steadied their nerves, and soon, they were bustling with fresh purpose, taking stock of the storerooms, preparing large pots of barley stew, ordering water and bread to be carried out to the gates. Margaery carefully assessed the provisions and, with the help of the castle steward, decided how to stretch the supplies until wagons arrived from the Reach. She penned messages to Highgarden, instructing them to expedite shipments of grain, root vegetables, salted meats, whatever they could spare without depriving the local population. She set a Tyrell messenger to ride straight away, hoping no bandits or stray Lannister remnants would intercept him. By midday, the distribution efforts had begun. Long lines formed at several points in the city, with guards from both the Unsullied and the Tyrell Knights ensuring an orderly queue. The small folk, still skittish, found unexpected relief in the fact that the new queen's men, and Margaery Tyrell herself, were passing out rations. Some few shouted blessings, praising the fair rose of Highgarden for coming to their aid. Others were more cautious, uncertain if the promise of mercy would remain if a single spark reignited hostilities. Margaery moved among them, escorted by a handful of knights, offering smiles and calm words. It was a small gesture, but she saw the flicker of hope in tired eyes. In the late afternoon, she made her way to the throne room for a meeting of the new Queen's Council. She passed under the high vaulted ceilings, noticing that while the Iron Throne still stood, the grand dais around it had been damaged by falling debris. Workers with carts and wooden supports were clearing away rubble. Daenerys sat in a plain wooden chair near the steps to the Iron Throne, an odd sight, as though the seat of kings was too monstrous a symbol to occupy just yet. Tyrion stood at her right hand, occasionally glancing warily at the twisted metal behind them. Olenna Tyrell was also in attendance, perched on a cushioned seat brought over from one of the side chambers, her hawkish eyes surveying the room with curt interest. Alongside them were a handful of other key advisors, Grey Worm, Missandei, and representatives from the Dothraki and the Unsullied. Margaery approached and dipped a respectful curtsy. Daenerys inclined her head, gesturing for her to sit on a nearby bench. Olenna gave her granddaughter an approving nod. Once Margaery had settled, Daenerys began. As you all know, we've secured the city and taken Cersei into custody. She is being held in a secure tower, guarded by the Unsullied. The people have begun to receive rations. Yet we cannot remain an occupying army forever. We need structure, laws, and leadership beyond mere force. Let us discuss how to restore governance. Tyrion spoke first. We must reconstitute the small council. That means appointing new masters of coin, laws, ships, and whisperers, as well as a Grand Maester loyal to her grace. We cannot rely on the old functionaries. Most fled with Cersei or perished when she blew up the September. And the City Watch must be reorganized. Many of the Gold Cloaks either deserted or were killed in the fighting. Daenerys nodded. Agreed. I want people I can trust, but I also want to extend an olive branch to any who might serve faithfully, Lannister or otherwise. My father's downfall came, in part, because he surrounded himself with sycophants and fanatics. We must not make that mistake. Olenna's lips twitched. Perhaps a wise notion, Your Grace, though I would advise caution. The Lannisters have a certain knack for insinuating themselves into positions of influence. If you let too many of them slither back, you might regret it. Tyrion's mouth tightened at the mention of the word Lannisters. Though he himself was one, he cleared his throat. I have no intention of inviting my extended family into the council. Most of them are dead, missing, or in revolt somewhere. But there may be skilled administrators we can recall from the previous Baratheon court, or even from the days of the Targaryens, those who harbor no ill will. The capital is full of potential recruits, if we sift carefully. Margaery spoke up. I can recommend a few individuals who served under my father-in-law, Mace Tyrell, during his time on the small council, as well as some who served with Lord Olenna at Highgarden and are adept with finances. Mastering the city's coin flow will be crucial, especially with the costs of rebuilding. And yes, the Watch must be reformed. The common folk will feel safer if we staff the Gold Cloaks with men from the city itself. Men they know and trust, and perhaps a portion of unsullied oversight until stability returns. Daenerys listened intently. Very well. Tyrion, Margaery, gather lists of potential candidates. I will review them tomorrow. For now, let us finalize the immediate trials for Cersei and her known accomplices. Missandei, please read out the procedure I asked you to draft. Missandei stood with a scroll in her slender hands. In a clear, calm voice, she outlined the plan for a public hearing. A set date, the formal charges against Cersei, regicide of King Tommen by negligence, the destruction of the Great September and murder of the faith militant and civilians within, treason against the realm, and conspiracy to incite war across Westeros, and the composition of a panel to hear evidence. Daenerys, as queen, would preside. Tyrion, as hand, would prosecute on the crown's behalf. Witnesses, including Margaery, would testify. A neutral panel of lords, drawn from the newly assembled small council, would issue a recommendation, and Daenerys would pronounce sentence. Margaery did not miss Olenna's unimpressed sniff when the notion of neutral lords was mentioned. Even so, it was the best compromise to show that the realm would not be ruled by whim. The plan garnered general approval from the council. The session concluded with Daenerys rising and stating that she wished to walk through the city, to see its condition firsthand. Grey Worm insisted on providing an armed escort, but Daenerys accepted only a small contingent, wanting the people to see her as more than just a conqueror astride a dragon. As the council disbanded, Margaery approached Olenna. Her grandmother rose with a measured sigh, leaning on the carved arm of her seat. Margaery offered her an arm, which the older woman accepted with regal dignity. You handled yourself well, Olenna said softly, glancing at the departing queen. The Targaryen girl seems more merciful than I expected. Let us hope that mercy doesn't get her killed, or turn the realm against her, Margaery agreed. But we must make the most of it. A queen who actually cares about the people, rare though it might be, could be precisely what Westeros needs. Outside, the wind carried the lingering stench of smoke, but the day was bright, the sun determined to pierce the gloom. Margaery paused in a colonnade overlooking the city. She saw columns of refugees returning, the slow shuffle of tired men and women. A group of Dothraki riders trotted down the street of the Sisters, curious but, by Daenerys' edict, restrained. She drew a breath of the changing air, thinking that if they could navigate these next days carefully, truly good things might emerge from the ruin. House Tyrell stood at the side of the Targaryen queen, and so far, Daenerys had shown every sign of respecting their role. That evening, Margaery dined with her grandmother, Tyrion, and a handful of others in a smaller hall off the Great Hall. The menu was simple: roasted vegetables, salted fish, bread, and watered wine. The conversation revolved around the day's achievements in feeding the city and stabilizing pockets of unrest. The only sour note was the occasional mention of possible retaliation from the Westerlands or from whatever fragments of Lannister power might remain. Tyrion advised sending diplomatic overtures to those houses, promising leniency if they swore fealty to Daenerys. Olenna countered that the Lannisters rarely answered kindness with anything but cunning. Margaery listened closely, gleaning what she could from each vantage. After supper, she took a moment to walk through the courtyard. Only a few torches illuminated the gloom. Guards still patrolled. From somewhere overhead, she heard a distant rumble, as if one of the dragons was shifting its weight on the ramparts. She drew her cloak around her shoulders, recalling how, not so long ago, these corridors had felt like a prison. Now, she was free to move, but the burden of responsibility weighed heavier than any manacles. She nearly jumped when she came upon Jaime Lannister in the shadows near a battered stone arch. His once pristine armor was scuffed, his golden hand dulled by soot. He stood alone, his face gaunt with the aftermath of battle and heartbreak. Margaery stopped, uncertain whether she should speak or quietly pass by, but Jaime sensed her presence and lifted his gaze. "Lady Margaery," he said, inclining his head. His voice held a subdued note, devoid of the sardonic edge she remembered. "Sir Jaime," she replied, "I did not expect to see you here." She kept her tone polite yet guarded. For all the talk of mercy, Jaime was still a Lannister, and Cersei's twin brother, once rumored to be far more. Jaime exhaled. "I was about to retire, but I find it hard to rest. I've lost so much. So many have." Margaery studied him. She saw lines of grief and guilt etched into his face. "Yes," she said quietly. "The war has taken a toll on everyone, but you aided Daenerys in the end, preventing Cersei from lighting the city on wildfire. That alone saved countless lives." He offered a bitter half-smile, a twist of irony, that I'm the one preventing a mad ruler from burning a city. Again, he shook his head. "It doesn't absolve me of my family name or all that I've done, but I couldn't let her turn King's Landing to ash." Margaery searched his eyes. Long ago, she had dismissed Jaime as an arrogant knight who cared for little but his own glory. Yet she remembered the hush of rumors that he had once killed Daenerys' father to stop the destruction of King's Landing. And now, once more, he had stood in the breach. "I believe," she said slowly, "that you did what you thought was right. For that, I am thankful." Jaime's gaze flickered toward the battered walls. "I expect no gratitude. I simply want to see the realm at peace. If Daenerys can do that, I might find some purpose in serving her." He paused, as though gauging her reaction. "I saw you in the throne room. You didn't hesitate to stand with her. Now you're one of her chief counselors. Are you certain this is not just another snake pit?" She smiled, but it was tinged with weariness. "Every court is a snake pit, Jaime. We can only choose who holds the power. I believe Daenerys' intentions are genuine, and I'd rather help build a realm that might bring healing than remain chained to Cersei's madness." He closed his eyes briefly, as if grappling with the mention of his sister's name. "Then I wish you well, Lady Margaery. For what it's worth, I think you might be exactly the sort of ally Daenerys needs. a voice of reason beloved by the small folk. If you can keep the worst impulses at bay, perhaps we'll emerge into a better age. She inclined her head. And what will you do now? I'll await the Queen's judgment, I suppose, Jaime said, a trace of weary resignation in his tone. I was her enemy, then her reluctant ally. It's unclear how she'll see me. Before Margaery could reply, a guard approached, carrying a torch that cast shifting light across the archway. Sir Jaime, the Queen's hand wishes to speak with you, he said. He awaits you in the council chamber. Jaime gave Margaery a faint, tired smile and followed the guard. She watched him go, her thoughts swirling. His presence reminded her that in the aftermath of war, alliances and enmities were not so easily undone. Yet if a man like Jaime, the Kingslayer, could be uncertain of his future, then truly all of Westeros stood on shifting ground. She returned to her chambers in the keep's upper levels. A pair of Tyrell guards stood at attention outside the door. The furniture within was sparse. A battered wooden table, a single bed, a small hearth that had seen better days, but it was enough. She removed her cloak, sank into the chair, and closed her eyes. 1,000 tasks clamored for attention, but exhaustion threatened to drag her under. She let out a long sigh, wishing she could vanish into a deep, dreamless sleep. A gentle knock roused her. One of her handmaidens peeked in, carrying a bowl of steaming water for washing. Margaery mumbled her gratitude, rinsed her face, and tried to shake off the day's fatigue. Her mind roamed ahead, to the trial to come, to the formal coronation Daenerys would likely hold, to the delicate task of forging alliances with the North and Dorne. She thought of Highgarden, left behind in a precarious state. No doubt her grandmother would handle any issues there, but it weighed on her all the same. At last, she undressed and lay down on the bed, pulling a thin blanket over her. Sleep claimed her fitfully, bringing half-formed nightmares of green fire and screeching dragons. She awoke before dawn. The candle burned low. Rising, she pressed her palm to the small window. A faint gray light signaled a new day. She donned a simple gown of Tyrell green, found her handmaiden still dozing in the corner, and gently nudged the girl awake. There was much to do, as always. She ate a small breakfast of bread, cheese, and watered wine, then ventured out to reconvene with Daenerys' council on the state of the city. They met in a lesser audience chamber to avoid the bustle of workers clearing debris in the Great Hall. Daenerys, Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, and a few others had already gathered. Olenna sat near the table, her hands folded over her cane, an image of calm that concealed a razor mind. Daenerys looked up as Margaery entered. "Good morning, Lady Margaery. How fares the city?" Margaery curtsied. "Better, Your Grace. Our distribution efforts have reached 2/3 of the districts. There are lines, but they remain peaceful. Fear is still thick, however. Many are uncertain if we plan to remain or if another wave of violence looms." Daenerys' jaw set. "We'll show them a gentler hand. The war is over here. And about the trial, Tyrion, has the word been spread?" Tyrion nodded. "Riders have gone out to the lords and ladies near the Crownlands. A small number of them will gather to witness the proceedings. We'll hold it in 2 days' time. We should finalize the charges and the witness list by midday today." Daenerys looked to Margaery. "Will you stand with me as we announce the trial to the people?" Margaery hesitated. "If that is your wish, of course. But are you certain the people will accept me, given my history here?" Her last memories of King's Landing had included the imprisonment orchestrated by the High Sparrow, the manipulations of Cersei. Yet she had maintained a strong popular following, if rumor spoke true. Tyrion interjected softly. "In the eyes of many common folk, Lady Margaery, you were the queen they truly loved. Your charity, your visits to orphans, those things are not easily forgotten. They saw you as a victim of Cersei's cruelty. Your presence alongside Daenerys will reassure them that this new regime is both strong and compassionate." Daenerys nodded. "I would value your support. The people already look to you for guidance. Stand with me, and they will see that the Targaryen queen and the Tyrell Rose share one vision for the realm." Margaery inclined her head. Then I shall gladly stand at your side, your grace." They spent the next hours in a swirl of preparation. Tyrion drafted official proclamations, Missandei oversaw their copying and distribution, and Daenerys composed a short speech explaining the necessity of the trial. Margaery offered suggestions on phrasing that might resonate with the small folk. Olenna, though outwardly dismissive of all the ceremony, gave pointed advice about ensuring the nobility recognized the queen's authority. Meanwhile, Grey Worm quietly managed the security arrangements. A crowd was expected at the foot of the Red Keep, and tensions ran high. That afternoon, a small platform was erected before the keep's battered entrance. Soldiers swept the square, cordoning off enough space for a large gathering. Late in the day, Daenerys and Margaery emerged together, accompanied by Tyrion, Olenna, and the rest of the queen's retinue. The sight of two women, one in Targaryen black and red, the other in Tyrell green and gold, captured the attention of onlookers from all sides. Margaery glanced around at the crowd that pressed in, kept in check by Unsullied and Tyrell knights. She saw suspicion in some faces, hope in others, curiosity in many. More people filtered from side streets, lured by the rumor that the Dragon Queen would speak. Daenerys stepped forward, shoulders squared. In the hush that settled, her voice rang clear. "People of King's Landing, I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, your new queen, here to bring justice and peace to this city. No longer shall you live in fear of tyranny or wildfire. I have come with dragons, but I do not seek to burn your homes. I seek to restore order and protect your families from harm." A faint murmur rippled. Daenerys continued, gaze sweeping the crowd. "Cersei Lannister, the woman who ruled you through fear, stands accused of grave crimes. Murder, treason, and the destruction of the Great September. In 2 days, we will hold a trial to determine her guilt before all. If she is found guilty, she will receive the sentence she is due. No longer will your rulers hide behind intimidation and cruelty. I will show this city what true justice looks like." A few in the crowd shouted agreement. Others wore guarded expressions. Margaery stepped closer, drawing breath. "Citizens," she began, letting her voice carry. "I am Margaery of House Tyrell, once your queen by marriage, always your queen in the hearts of many. I know the suffering you have endured. I too was cast aside and imprisoned when Cersei seized her power. But now we have a chance for a different future. Queen Daenerys has pledged not to harm the innocent and to provide food and aid where needed. Already, wagons from the Reach are on their way here. I ask that you give her your trust, and we will work tirelessly to rebuild what was lost." She paused, letting the words sink in. A wave of uneasy acceptance seemed to pass over the assembled crowd. Then, tentatively, one voice shouted, "Bless you, Lady Margaery." Another cried, "Long live the Dragon Queen." More voices joined in. It was neither a thunderous ovation nor a riotous condemnation, but a hesitant, budding swell of support. Daenerys lifted her hands in a gesture of acknowledgement. "We will not fail you," she said simply. Then she and Margaery withdrew, stepping back onto the dais. Guards escorted them inside, and the crowd resumed its low hum of speculation. Inside the keep, Daenerys let out a pent-up breath. "That went better than I feared. Still, the city is on edge." "Attitudes do not change overnight," Margaery said. "But you have taken a crucial first step. Reassure them with action. Feed them, keep them safe, and they will come to respect you in time." Daenerys lowered her gaze, as though remembering how different it had been in Meereen, where winning hearts had been both exhilarating and grueling. "I will do my best," she murmured. "Thank you for standing by my side, Lady Margaery. Your presence matters more than I can say." Margaery touched her arm gently. "We rise or fall together now, Your Grace. My family and I are committed to your reign. Let us see it prosper." They parted ways, each returning to the myriad responsibilities that awaited. While Daenerys conferred with Tyrion on the structure of the upcoming trial, Margaery oversaw a fresh distribution of bread near the main gate. She spoke with the city's bakers, encouraging them to reopen their shops under the Queen's protection. Throughout the day, she found herself repeatedly answering questions about whether the dragons might burn entire neighborhoods or whether Dothraki screamers would rampage down the streets. She soothed these fears as best she could, emphasizing Daenerys' orders against harming civilians. When dusk settled, Margaery finally returned to the keep, her feet aching from hours of standing. In the corridor, she caught sight of Olenna, who beckoned her closer with a crooked finger. Margaery obliged, noticing her grandmother wore an expression somewhere between amusement and exasperation. "Child," Olenna said, leaning in, "must you wear yourself thin with all this do-goodery? The new queen values you, yes, but you should take care not to become the simple figurehead for charitable works. We Tyrells must remain formidable as well as kind." Margaery managed a small laugh. "I assure you, grandmother, my attempts to aid the people will win their loyalty, and that is a formidable tool in itself. When the populace loves you, they are less likely to rise up against you or side with your enemies. You've taught me that lesson many times." Olenna harumphed. "True enough, but be sure you keep an eye on the bigger matters like how Daenerys handles the lords of Westeros. Mercy is all well and good, but we must ensure the Targaryen monarchy does not get entangled in 1,000 petty squabbles. A strong hand is sometimes needed." Margaery nodded. "I will keep it in mind. In 2 days, the entire realm will see how she deals with Cersei. That moment may set the tone for her entire reign." Olenna's lips tightened. "Then it must be done carefully, very carefully." They spent the remainder of the evening in close counsel with Tyrion and a handful of others, finalizing the details of the trial. The next day passed in a tense flurry, witnesses arriving, lords from the Crownlands braving the roads to attend. Even a few from the Stormlands appeared, cautious but curious about the new queen. Dawn of the trial day arrived too soon, and Margaery found her stomach twisted with nerves. She wore a formal gown in Tyrell green, with gold embroidery depicting interwoven roses and dragons along the sleeves, a subtle tribute to the alliance she now embodied. The chosen site for the trial was the courtyard of the Great September's ruins. Huge piles of rubble still littered the area, and scaffolds had been erected to keep precariously balanced stones from collapsing. The scorched ground and blackened marble archways gave the space a haunting air. It was said that thousands had perished there when Cersei ignited the wildfire beneath the September. In a grim sort of irony, it made a fitting stage for her reckoning. A large wooden platform had been constructed against the backdrop of crumbling pillars. Daenerys presided from a high seat, simpler than the Iron Throne but meant to convey authority. On one side stood Tyrion, wearing the hand's brooch, and near him Missandei, a scribe ready to record the proceedings. On the other side, a vacant seat waited for Cersei, flanked by unsullied guards. Lords and ladies milled behind a low barrier, forming an audience of perhaps 100. The common folk, too, gathered beyond, kept at a respectful distance by rows of Tyrell knights and unsullied spears, under the watchful gaze of Drogon, who clung to a broken spire overhead. The trial began. The menacing shape of the dragon loomed, a warning that no violence would be tolerated. Smoke curled from his nostrils as he eyed the crowd. The tension was palpable. Sunlight angled across the courtyard, illuminating dust motes that sparkled in the air. Cersei was brought forth. She looked a shadow of her former self. Her hair, regrown only slightly, framed a face etched with bitterness and sleepless nights. Chains bound her wrists, and the unsullied guards forced her to sit on the stool opposite Daenerys. Jaime Lannister stood among the onlookers, grim and silent, his expression unreadable. Tyrion addressed the gathering. "We are convened to hear the charges against Cersei of the House Lannister, once Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, now a prisoner accused of grievous crimes. By order of Her Grace, Queen Daenerys, these proceedings will be fair and open. I, Tyrion Lannister, Hand of the Queen, shall present the charges." He gestured to the scribe, who unrolled a parchment. Tyrion's voice carried, "Cersei stands accused of orchestrating the destruction of the Great September of Baelor by wildfire, resulting in the deaths of the High Septon, the Faith Militant, and hundreds of innocent worshippers. She stands accused of treason against King Tommen, her own son, whose tragic death she allowed, or even caused, through her machinations and mental cruelty. She stands accused of instigating a war against rightful heirs to the Iron Throne, defying the peace of the realm, and condemning many to die. Lastly, she is accused of moral crimes, torture, false imprisonment, and subversion of the faith that contributed to unrest in the capital. Cersei's lips twisted into a contemptuous smile. Moral crimes, is it? This from a Targaryen and her band of savages? Save your hypocrisy. Daenerys, seated above, regarded her coolly. You will have a chance to speak, but you will keep your tongue in check. I will not allow disruptions. Cersei snorted but said nothing more. Tyrion began calling witnesses. Several city dwellers testified about the day of the Great September's destruction, describing the green fire that consumed the structure in an instant. Members of the faith who had survived the periphery of the blast recounted the horror. Then came a former Lannister guard who confessed that he had heard rumors of hidden caches of wildfire placed under Cersei's orders. Olenna took the stand next, her back straight, voice cold. She spoke of how Cersei had manipulated the faith militant to imprison Margaery and Loras, all to undermine House Tyrell's influence. Her words were sharp as thorns, painting a vivid picture of Cersei's cruelty. The crowd listened in tense silence. When Margaery stepped forward to give her testimony, she felt 1,000 eyes on her. She recounted her own imprisonment, how Cersei had seemed to delight in her humiliation, and how that path ultimately led to the explosion at the September, which claimed the lives of the High Sparrow and many others. She spoke of Tommen, that gentle boy king, so tormented by the manipulations around him that he took his own life. He was my husband, she said, her voice trembling with emotion she did not have to feign. I cared for him, young as he was, and I tried to guide him toward kindness. But in the end, his mother's plots left him hopeless. A ripple of sympathy moved through the crowd. Margaery stepped away, her heart pounding. Though she despised Cersei, she could not help the swirl of old sorrow rising in her. Tommen had indeed been a sweet child, undeserving of such an end. Tyrion called others, including small folk who had witnessed Lannister men punishing rumored dissidents in the streets under Cersei's orders. He summarized how the realm had descended into chaos under her short but brutal rule, culminating in the final stand that brought Daenerys' forces to the capital. At last, it was time for Cersei to speak in her own defense. She stood, chains clanking, and turned to face Daenerys. Her chin jutted out defiantly. I see a foreign queen with her monstrous beasts of fire, and a turncloak rose from the reach, pointing fingers at me for the tragedies that befell this city. It was war. War does not choose who dies. I did what I had to do to protect the throne that was mine by right of regency. The faith conspired against me. The Tyrells schemed to seize power, and my son was too weak to stand on his own. I refused to be judged by those who lack the spine to do what must be done. Her eyes flicked to the crowd. I am not the monster here. Daenerys Targaryen would have burned this entire city if it pleased her. She brought Dothraki hordes to our shores. She unleashed dragons, and you fools cheer for her? Then so be it. Condemn me if you will, but your new queen's hands are hardly clean. A hush fell over the courtyard. Cersei's furious gaze lingered on Margaery, then Tyrion, then rose to Daenerys. The Targaryen queen met her stare, unmoved. If you have nothing else to say, Daenerys said softly, the panel will deliberate. She gestured to the handful of lords and advisors seated to one side, representatives from the Crownlands, from House Tyrell, and a few neutral parties. They retired behind a temporary screen to confer. Cersei sank back onto her stool. Margaery watched her, recalling all the humiliations she had endured under that gaze. She saw in Cersei a woman who once might have been capable of love. Love for her children, certainly, but who had become so twisted by fear and ambition that everything else had crumbled. Time stretched as the panel deliberated, their hushed voices carrying faintly in the open air. The crowd stirred, and Drogon released a snort of smoke that drew startled gasps. At length, the panel returned. The spokesman, a middle-aged lord from House Hayford, cleared his throat. We, the undersigned, find the accused, Cersei Lannister, guilty on all counts. The evidence is overwhelming, and her own words offer little justification. We therefore recommend the maximum penalty, which, by law, is death. Cersei did not flinch, though the faintest tremor passed over her features. The crowd murmured. Daenerys rose from her seat, standing tall. Cersei Lannister, you have been found guilty of murder, treason, and atrocities committed against the faith and the people of this city. By the power vested in me as the rightful queen of the Undulls and the First Men, I sentence you to die. Some in the crowd cheered, others fell silent, stunned. Tyrion's face was drawn with resignation. Jaime stood in the throng, his jaw tight, eyes glimmering with sorrow. Margaery felt a hollow sense of finality. It was just, she told herself, yet she could not quite rejoice. So many lives lost, so many regrets. Daenerys paused, letting the hush deepen. However, she continued, her voice steady, I do not wish to become a queen of blood. Enough death has stained this city. Therefore, I grant you the option of exile in perpetuity, should you choose it, under guard, beyond the narrow sea, never to return to Westeros on pain of death. You will live, stripped of lands and titles, a guest of the Red Temple in Volantis, far from these shores. The choice is yours, a swift execution or banishment to the east. An astonished murmur went through the crowd. Margaery herself felt a flicker of shock. She had not expected Daenerys to offer exile. It was a remarkable display of mercy, or perhaps a calculated move to avoid martyring Cersei. Cersei glared at Daenerys, uncertain whether to spit in her face or seize the sliver of life that remained. Jaime, from his place in the crowd, looked as though he might intervene, but he held his tongue. In the end, Cersei let out a ragged breath. You think I would live out my days in shame across the sea? You think you spare me? You only prolong the inevitable. Everything I loved is gone. But fine, I'll take your scraps of mercy, if only to see what new miseries the gods have in store for this wretched land without me. Daenerys inclined her head, her expression unreadable. So be it. You shall leave within the week, under guard, never to return. If you set foot in Westeros again, you forfeit your life. Cersei's face was like stone. Guards seized her arms, leading her away to the jeers and curses of the crowd. Jaime turned away, disappearing into the throng. Margaery pressed a hand to her heart, exhaling slowly. The trial was ended, the sentence passed. A sense of relief mingled with a quiet dread. Justice, or something close to it, had been served. The rest of Westeros would see that Daenerys Targaryen was no butcher queen. She offered even her fiercest enemy a path to live, albeit in perpetual exile. Later, Margaery found herself alone with Daenerys in one of the ruin-strewn alcoves near the collapsed September. The queen leaned against a half-broken marble column, rubbing her injured arm absently. Her eyes were distant, as though replaying the moment of sentencing. Margaery approached, her footsteps echoing on loose gravel. Your Grace, she said softly, the realm will remember your mercy, yet I sense the burden it places upon you. Daenerys turned, her face haunted. All my life, I have dreamed of how I would deal with those who wronged me and my family. But now, when the moment comes, I find I cannot stomach more slaughter. Seeing the city burn, seeing the fear in people's eyes, this is not the legacy I want. And yet a part of me wonders if letting her live is weakness. Margaery shook her head. I do not think it weakness. It shows you are not the Mad King's daughter in spirit, no matter how many try to paint you so. The people will speak of your clemency. That is a strong foundation to build upon. Daenerys offered a rueful smile. Then let it be so. We have taken a step forward. Now we must see how the rest of Westeros responds. The North remains in flux, the Eyrie under the boy Lord Robin Arryn, and the Iron Islands with Yara Greyjoy. With your help, Lady Margaery, I hope to forge new bonds that will finally unify the Seven Kingdoms. Margaery felt a stirring of optimism. We Tyrells are no strangers to forging alliances. My grandmother has already begun sending envoys. We'll do whatever is necessary to help you secure peace. In return, we only ask that the Reach remains ours to protect and cultivate." Daenerys nodded. "I will not forget your loyalty. Highgarden is yours, to flourish as it always has. Together, we will reshape this realm." Margaery bowed her head. She sensed that a new age was indeed dawning. The trial had drawn a line under an old era of brutality and lies, though it would take far more than a single verdict to erase all that had come before. Even so, she felt a cautious thrill. Perhaps Daenerys would truly break the wheel of tyranny, and perhaps Margaery, the rose who survived the lion's den, could guide this fledgling monarchy toward compassion and growth. That night, a feast of sorts was held in the Red Keep, though it bore little resemblance to the lavish banquets of the past. The mood was subdued, overshadowed by the fresh memories of war. Still, some measure of relief filtered through. The largest table in the hall groaned under simpler fare: roasted fowl, onions, a few fresh fruits from the Reach, plus the ubiquitous bread and ale. Lords from the Crownlands mingled with Tyrell knights, unsure of the new order but relieved that the city had not been razed. Daenerys appeared late, wearing a gown of smoke gray with the three-headed dragon embroidered on her sleeves. The bandage on her arm was hidden beneath the flowing fabric. She took her seat at the high table, flanked by Tyrion and Missandei. Margaery and Olenna were ushered to join them, along with a smattering of important lords. Grey Worm and a pair of Dothraki bloodriders remained standing at a respectful distance, ever watchful. The conversation flickered around them in muted bursts. Tyrion tried to spark levity, joking lightly about how they might rename King's Landing Dragon's Roost if the city did not shape up. Olenna rolled her eyes at him. Daenerys sipped watered wine, scanning the hall as though noting each new face and forging silent judgments. Margaery drifted in and out of polite chat with other guests, but her mind churned with questions of the future. Partway through the meal, a servant leaned in to whisper something in Missandei's ear. Missandei relayed the message to Daenerys, who frowned slightly and beckoned the messenger forward. The young man, trembling at the honor, stepped onto the dais. "Speak," Daenerys said softly, setting down her cup. The messenger bowed. "My queen, a raven arrived from the north, sent by King Jon Snow of Winterfell, if it please you." At that, a mild hush spread around the high table. Daenerys gestured for him to continue. "King Jon requests an audience with your grace. He warns of a threat beyond the wall, an army of the dead, led by creatures known as White Walkers. He pleads for alliance and aid in the wars to come, stating that a greater enemy looms than any Lannister or Targaryen dispute." A murmur rippled through the listeners. Daenerys's expression turned thoughtful. Tyrion rested his elbows on the table, swirling his wine. Margaery had heard rumors of these White Walkers. Ghost stories from the north, tales of whites and an eternal winter. Few in the southern realms believed them. Yet if King Jon Snow had taken the trouble to send a raven, perhaps there was something more than rumor at play. Daenerys dismissed the messenger, then looked to Tyrion, who exchanged glances with Margaery and Olenna. The queen pursed her lips. "Jon Snow, the king in the north, or so he's declared. My father lost the north during Robert's rebellion. We never truly regained it. Now he writes about an army of the dead." She leaned forward. "I have heard the stories. It's difficult to separate truth from legend." Tyrion spread his hands. "I traveled beyond the wall once, many years ago. I heard queer tales, saw the remnants of some dreadful threats. But is it truly a horde of undead soldiers? If so, we have a problem far graver than petty feuds." Olenna sniffed. "Threats from the north, indeed. The north is always complaining about some terror. First the Boltons, now the undead. Next, they'll blame an ice dragon." She paused. "But we cannot ignore the possibility. If it's real, ignoring it could be the realm's undoing." Margaery let out a slow breath. "If King Jon Snow is sincere, it might be wise to at least open talks. The realm is weary of war. If we must fight a greater threat, better to unite now than wait until it's too late." Daenerys nodded, as though deciding. Then I will send a reply. If Jon Snow seeks an audience, he shall have it on my terms. Let him come to me here in King's Landing or perhaps on Dragonstone, where I first made my seat. I will hear his tales of the undead. But I will not let the North stand apart if we are to share a realm. The mention of the North added an entirely new dimension to Daenerys's reign. Margaery felt the shift keenly. They had barely secured King's Landing, and now rumor of supernatural armies threatened to overshadow the realm's freshly won peace. It seemed the Game of Thrones never truly ended, only changed shape. Over the next few days, as King's Landing continued its slow return to normalcy under Tyrell and Targaryen guidance, the matter of the North occupied more and more space in the Queen's councils. Daenerys drafted a formal summons to Jon Snow, inviting him to parley. Olenna cautioned that the North could be an unpredictable ally, shaped by harsh winters and proud traditions. Tyrion mused that forging unity between the Crown and the North would require delicate negotiations, especially if the stories of White Walkers were true. Meanwhile, the sentences for Cersei's remaining loyalists were handed down. Some, like Qyburn, had already perished in the final assault. Others were exiled or imprisoned. The Gold Cloaks were reorganized under a new commander, a loyal Tyrell bannerman known for fairness. Daenerys established a provisional small council with Tyrion as hand, Margaery as a key advisor, often referred to as Master of Grace by those who appreciated her ability to soothe tensions, and a handful of lords from the Crownlands. A new Grand Maester arrived from the Citadel. Bit by bit, the structures of governance began to function once more. Margaery found a unique niche in overseeing the Queen's philanthropic efforts, overseeing bread distribution, ensuring stability in Flea Bottom, encouraging reconstruction of the city's battered gates. Yet she was not content to remain in the background. She requested Daenerys' permission to sit in on more strategic councils, to represent the interests of the Reach in discussions about forging alliances with Dorne and the Vale. Daenerys, impressed by her political acumen and popularity, agreed. As the days passed, small triumphs and bitter losses mingled in the city. Dragons soared overhead, at times a source of awe and at times a source of fear. Merchants began to reopen their stalls. The Red Keep's artisans hammered away at repairs. The small folk talked of Queen Daenerys and Queen Margaery, though Margaery herself hastened to clarify that she was no queen now. She had been won by marriage, but Tommen was gone. "I merely serve the realm," she told them with a smile. Still, rumors flitted through the alleys and taverns that perhaps Daenerys might name Margaery her hand in place of Tyrion, or some other grand station. Gossip always clung to Margaery like a swirling cloak, but she had learned how to use it to her advantage. She could not ignore the pressing matter of Highgarden, either. With so much energy devoted to stabilizing King's Landing, House Tyrell needed to ensure the Reach remained secure. Olenna oversaw it from a distance, sending detailed reports. Their bannermen, so recently mustered for the war, were returning to their lands. The harvest was nearly complete, and with it came the necessity of collecting taxes and storing grain. Through ravens and trusted couriers, Margaery helped coordinate efforts, mindful that any sign of neglect might lead discontented lords to question the new order. Amid these labors, word arrived that Jon Snow had accepted Daenerys' invitation. He would travel south with a small retinue, though he expressed concern about leaving the North undefended. Daenerys elected to meet him at Dragonstone, both for strategic reasons, easier to see him without the clamor of the capital, and to show him her seat of power by the sea. Preparations began for a royal progress to Dragonstone. The Unsullied would remain in King's Landing to maintain security, while a smaller contingent of Dothraki and Tyrell knights would escort the Queen and her court across the Blackwater Bay. Margaery found herself included among the entourage, to her mingled excitement and trepidation. She recalled the fortress's dark corridors from her earlier secret visit. Now she would return openly at Daenerys' side. The day of departure saw a grand procession leaving King's Landing. The Queen's black and red banners fluttered alongside Tyrell gold and green. A handful of carriages rumbled behind, carrying provisions and valuables. Drogon circled overhead, occasionally alighting on a rooftop, causing the city dwellers below to crane their necks in astonishment. Margaery rode near the front, wearing a traveling cloak embroidered with the Tyrell rose. The city gates swung open, and the column moved onto the coastal road. It felt strangely liberating to leave the capital behind, no longer in secrecy but in triumph. They made camp that night on a seaside bluff, the roar of waves below. Margaery found Daenerys near the cliff edge after sunset, gazing at the moonlight dancing on the water. The queen's silver hair caught the glow, and for a moment, she seemed as timeless as the ancient Valyrian blood in her veins. Margaery approached quietly. Daenerys turned her head, offering a fleeting smile. "I find the sea soothing in a way," she said softly. "Reminds me of my journey to Westeros, of all I left behind in Essos. Sometimes I wonder if the realm there did not need me more." Margaery inclined her head. "Yet you came here to claim your birthright, and from what I've heard, you left systems in place to continue your work of liberation. You have allies across the sea still, do you not?" Daenerys nodded. "Yes, but now the fate of these 7 kingdoms weighs on me. I must see it through." She paused, studying Margaery. "Do you ever regret casting your lot with me? Some might say you traded the safety of Highgarden for the uncertainties of a queen whose father once tormented the realm." Margaery smiled gently. "I have never regretted seeking a better path. The Lannisters were a dead end, quite literally. You offer something more: hope, renewal, the chance to break the cycle of cruelty. Even if it is difficult, it feels worth doing." Daenerys's eyes glimmered. "Thank you, Margaery. You have become one of my closest confidants. Together, we have accomplished much already." They stood there a while longer, the wind teasing the edges of their cloaks, the rhythmic thunder of the sea lulling them. The night felt vast and brimming with possibility. In the distance, Margaery spotted the faint glow of campfires. The Tyrell knights and Dothraki riders mingled in cautious camaraderie, a testament to the bridging of cultures under Daenerys's banner. The next day, they boarded ships to cross the bay toward Dragonstone. The waters were relatively calm, though a stiff breeze kept the sails taut. Margaery found herself on the same vessel as Daenerys, Tyrion, and a handful of other advisors. The smell of salt and damp would filled her senses, reminding her of the earlier covert journey she had taken alone. How different it felt now to sail openly, with the banners of House Targaryen and House Tyrell snapping overhead. After half a day at sea, Dragonstone's forbidding silhouette came into view, jagged spires of black stone shaped into dragon motifs that loomed over the churning waves. Margaery recalled her initial impression of the fortress. Imposing, mysterious, laden with centuries of Targaryen history. As they drew nearer, she noticed fresh activity on the walls. Unsullied stationed at vantage points, watchers scanning the horizon for signs of Jon Snow's ships. They made landfall at the same rocky beach as before. This time, Daenerys was greeted with cheers from her own garrison. Grey Worm led them up the winding path to the fortress gates, where the queen took possession of her ancestral seat once more. Margaery followed, letting the swirl of crisp sea air fill her lungs. Memories of her secret negotiations rose, but now the halls bustled with open purpose. Torches lit the corridors, and servants carried supplies to newly furnished rooms. The atmosphere felt more like a bustling court than a lonely outpost. Daenerys wasted no time in preparing to receive Jon Snow upon his arrival. She designated the massive map room, a chamber with a painted table shaped like Westeros, as the site of their initial parley. Margaery found it fascinating. The ancient table depicted the topography of the 7 kingdoms in remarkable detail, the coastlines and mountains in miniature. Daenerys explained it had belonged to her ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror, who used it to plan his conquest of the realm. While they awaited Jon Snow, Margaery took the opportunity to explore Dragonstone more thoroughly. She visited the library, sparse, but containing a few tomes on Valyrian lore, accompanied by Missandei, who shared an enthusiasm for knowledge. The two women discussed languages, culture, and the rumored legends of the Long Night. Margaery sensed in Missandei a keen intellect, shaped by years of slavery and subsequent liberation, and she felt a kinship in the desire to see justice done in the world. On the 3rd day after their arrival, sails appeared on the horizon. A small flotilla bearing Stark banners approached. Daenerys ordered an official welcome. Tyrion and a handful of Dothraki, along with Margaery and a few Tyrell knights, gathered at the beach to greet Jon Snow. When he disembarked, Margaery studied him curiously. He was younger than she'd expected, dressed in warm northern leathers despite the southern climate, a somber expression set on his face. His companions included Ser Davos Seaworth, a grizzled older man with an air of pragmatism, and several northern bannermen. Jon Snow bowed politely to Tyrion, who introduced himself as the Hand of the Queen. Then Jon's gaze drifted to Margaery, and there was a moment of recognition in his dark eyes, for he must have heard of her renown. He inclined his head. "Lady Margaery of House Tyrell, I've heard of your generosity and your trials in King's Landing. An honor to meet you." She offered a gracious smile. "Likewise, your grace. We look forward to hearing what the North faces. Queen Daenerys awaits you." Jon nodded, and together they ascended the winding stone path up to the fortress. The northern men gawked at the carved dragons perched along the walls, while the Dothraki eyed them warily. Once inside, Daenerys stood at the head of the painted table, regal in her black attire. Drogon's roar echoed outside, as if announcing her presence. Jon Snow greeted her with measured politeness, his gaze darting briefly to the dragons glimpsed through the high windows. Daenerys offered him no immediate illusions of equality. She introduced herself fully. "I am Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen, mother of dragons, breaker of chains," and so on. Jon listened respectfully, then introduced himself simply. "I am Jon Snow, King in the North." At Daenerys' invitation, they took seats around the painted table. Margaery watched closely as Tyrion attempted to mediate. A subtle dance ensued, Daenerys demanding Jon's fealty as a Targaryen queen, Jon urging her to unite against the Night King without addressing the question of bending the knee. Tension flared. Yet, amid the subtle bristling, Margaery sensed that both carried genuine concern for the realm. Jon spoke of the undead, the White Walkers, and the threat beyond the wall. He described how he and his allies had fought at Hardhome, how he'd seen the dead rise from those who fell. Margaery caught Daenerys' skeptical glance, but she also saw a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps, or a memory of her own experiences with the supernatural. When Jon insisted that forging dragonglass weapons would be crucial, Daenerys asked Tyrion's opinion, who turned to Margaery. She said quietly, "If the threat is as grave as he claims, ignoring it would be a grave mistake. Let him mine dragonglass, your grace. There is no harm in that, only potential aid." Daenerys considered. In the end, she agreed to allow Jon to mine the dragonglass on Dragonstone, if only to test his claims. The question of bending the knee was left in uneasy limbo. They spoke late into the night, each side cautious but keenly aware that new storms brewed on the horizon. Over the next days, Margaery observed a growing mutual respect between Jon Snow and Daenerys. She saw how both were weighed down by responsibility. Jon, the reluctant king who never asked for a crown, and Daenerys, the breaker of chains still learning the intricacies of Westeros's feudal loyalties. She offered her own counsel when asked, careful not to overstep. She saw the flicker of trust in Daenerys' eyes each time she spoke, a quiet gratitude for her measured approach. In spare moments, Margaery took walks around the fortress ramparts, gazing at the roiling sea and contemplating the realm's fate. The wheel she and Daenerys hoped to break was more complex than she had ever imagined. Beyond petty lords and fleeting alliances, there lurked an existential threat from the north, and the realm's fractious nature threatened to undermine any hope of true unity. Occasionally, she would glimpse Jon Snow walking the parapets as well, deep in thought. One evening, she ventured a conversation with him, finding him polite but reserved. He spoke of the North, the stoic determination of his people, and the bitter memory of wars that had vagued the Starks. She found him sincere, if blunt, and came to believe that his stories of the undead were no mere exaggeration. A man like Jon Snow did not peddle falsehoods. His eyes carried the weight of truth. The longer they stayed at Dragonstone, the more the lines of alliance began to form. Daenerys considered sending a portion of her forces north, if the threat proved real, but insisted on some form of acknowledgement of her authority from the northern lords. Jon resisted, fearing he would lose the fragile unity of his region. Margaery occasionally acted as a moderating voice, suggesting that a compromise might be found, a vow of cooperation rather than outright fealty, at least until the danger from the north was vanquished. Tyrion, for his part, agreed that the realm could ill afford a protracted conflict with the north over titles and honor, not when an army of the dead might be marching south. Daenerys, though frustrated, began to see the wisdom in forging a pragmatic alliance first, sorting out oaths later. In the midst of these deliberations, ravens arrived from King's Landing. Word that Euron Greyjoy's fleet was marauding the Narrow Sea, that pockets of Lannister loyalists still stirred trouble in the west. Daenerys realized she could not simply abandon the capital to rush north. Margaery urged a balanced strategy, splitting the Targaryen forces between holding King's Landing, patrolling the seas, and offering some reinforcements to the north. The Queen took the council under advisement, her mind churning with the complexities of rule. During this time, the Tyrell presence on Dragonstone remained strong. Garland Tyrell, commanding a detachment of knights, oversaw the security of the Queen's retinue. Olenna stayed behind in King's Landing to keep an eye on the fragile governance there, but she sent frequent letters to Margaery, offering pointed criticism or sly suggestions from afar. Margaery sometimes chuckled at her grandmother's acerbic notes, but she treasured the old woman's cunning insights. As the days lengthened, so too did the sense of an impending crossroads. Daenerys needed to make a choice: commit wholeheartedly to the Northern War, or solidify her control of the South before venturing beyond the Neck. Jon Snow, growing impatient, pressed for an immediate alliance, warning that winter was upon them, that the White Walkers would not pause for political maneuvers. One evening, amid the flickering torches of the map room, the Queen called a final strategy council. Margaery and Tyrion arrived to find Jon Snow already there, pacing along the painted coastline of the miniature Westeros. Daenerys stood by the table, hands clasped. Grey Worm and Ser Davos hovered nearby. A hush cloaked the chamber, as though all recognized the gravity of the moment. Jon raised his gaze to Daenerys. "I cannot wait longer, Your Grace. My people are in peril. We have only so many months, perhaps weeks, before the dead descend upon the wall." Daenerys drew a breath. "I understand, but I must keep King's Landing secure. If I march north with my full might, the Lannister remnants and Euron Greyjoy could strangle the capital in my absence. My claim would be undone." Margaery stepped closer. "What if we send a significant force north, enough to aid King Jon while leaving enough men in King's Landing to deter any rebellion? Your dragons, Your Grace, could be decisive in the north, even if only one accompanied Jon's host. The others might remain to guard the capital." Daenerys tapped her fingers on the table. "Splitting my dragons is risky, but perhaps Drogon can remain with me, and I could send Rhaegal or Viserion with a detachment. The presence of a dragon alone might bolster the northern defenses." Tyrion lifted an eyebrow. "That would certainly demonstrate commitment to King Jon's cause. But can the North handle the logistics of supporting an army bolstered by a dragon?" Jon Snow's jaw tightened. "We will manage. Winterfell's stores are stocked. If the Tyrell supply lines can reach us, so much the better." Margaery nodded. "House Tyrell will provide grain. We can arrange shipments by sea to White Harbor, though we must watch for Euron's fleet." They debated the details deep into the night. At last, a tentative plan emerged. A portion of Daenerys' forces, including a small group of Unsullied, some Dothraki, and one dragon, would accompany Jon Snow north. Margaery offered to organize the supply lines from the Reach. Tyrion insisted on returning to King's Landing with Daenerys to oversee the capital's stability. Daenerys, though torn, agreed it was wise. As they dispersed, Margaery sensed a quiet resolve in the air. The realm faced not only the lingering threat of Lannister loyalists but also something far more terrifying, a foe beyond the realm of men. And in the midst of all, a fragile alliance held them together, forged by the young Targaryen queen and the Rose of Highgarden who had chosen to stand at her side. So many challenges lay ahead, yet Margaery's heart refused despair. She had seen Daenerys rise above strife and prove her capacity for empathy and strength. Now, in forging this tenuous cooperation with the North, there was a spark of something grand, a realm uniting not by fear, but by purpose. Before she retired to her chamber, Margaery lingered alone in the fortress corridor, torchlight flickering off the obsidian pillars. She rested a hand against the cool stone, thinking of all that had transpired since she decided to support Daenerys Targaryen. She had endured a siege, toppled a tyrant queen, witnessed a trial that echoed through the city, and now stood on the verge of a new war, one that transcended the petty squabbles of crowns and titles. The entire realm's survival might hinge on what came next. A faint echo of footsteps drew her attention. It was Daenerys, passing through the corridor on her way to her own chambers, escorted by 2 Dothraki guards. She paused upon seeing Margaery and dismissed her guards with a gesture. Their eyes met in the wavering torchlight. "Could you not sleep, Lady Margaery?" Daenerys asked, her voice subdued. Margaery offered a wan smile. "Rest is elusive these days. My mind is too full of plans and worries." Daenerys sighed. "We are alike then. My dreams are haunted by war and the unknown. But I am glad you are here. I could not have come this far without your counsel." Margaery lowered her gaze. "You honor me, your grace. When I pledged my loyalty to you, I meant it. Through battles and feasts, trials and negotiations, I will not waver." "Nor will I," Daenerys murmured. "Tomorrow we sail for King's Landing. The day after, you will oversee the supplies for the North. We will press on step by step." In the hush that followed, Margaery felt the weight of the future pressing on them both. The queen's violet eyes glimmered with determination. Margaery found herself lifting her chin, mirroring that resolve. Whatever perils lay ahead, whether the cunning of Euron Greyjoy or the unstoppable march of an undead army, she would face them as an ally to the Dragon Queen. A rose in the company of dragons, weaving alliances and forging new paths in a land yearning for deliverance. She bid Daenerys good night and made her way to her room, the flicker of hope a small but steady flame in her chest. The wheel of power was grinding forward, but perhaps, at last, it was turning in a direction that could lift Westeros from its endless cycle of suffering. House Tyrell and House Targaryen had joined forces. The North, too, now beckoned. If the realm was to survive, it would be only by unity, compassion, and the strength of those who refused to yield to darkness. Margaery closed her door behind her, letting the sea wind stir the dim fire in the hearth, and vowed that she would do all in her power to see this fragile dream become reality.